My wife Rebecca died 2 years ago come January, Cole said without emotion, following her gaze around the room. Childbed fever. The baby died too, a son. His voice didn't waver on the words, but Martha heard the weight of old grief beneath the flat delivery. Left me with Emma, my daughter. She's 10 now and grown half wild without a mother's influence. I've got 2 ranch hands who help with the cattle and heavy work, but neither of them can keep a house or cook worth a damn, and I'm not much better. We've been managing, but barely. Winter's coming on and I need help. Martha nodded, understanding the practical nature of his need. Where is your daughter now? Out riding somewhere? She does that when she's upset, and she's been upset since I told her this morning I'd placed an advertisement for household help. Cole moved to the fireplace and stirred the fire back to life with a poker. She doesn't want anyone replacing her mother. Can't say I blame her, but wanting and needing are different things. The ranch is 3 sections, mostly grazing land for cattle. We're 15 miles from town, which means we're on our own most of the time. Nearest neighbour is 5 miles east. It's isolated, Mrs. Hensley. Some women find that hard. I've found towns harder, Martha said quietly, and saw understanding flicker in his eyes. What are you offering for wages? Room and board for you and your children, Cole said. Separate quarters, naturally. There's a room off the kitchen that was meant for hired help. It's small but private, with its own door and a window. Your children could share the loft space above if that suits, or we could arrange something else. As for wages, $20 a month, and whatever you need for clothing and necessities for yourself and the children. I'll provide all food and staples. If you can make this house livable again and keep us fed through the winter, I'll count it money well spent. It was more than fair, more than generous, really. Martha had expected to have to beg for less. $20 a month was what a ranch hand might make, and with room and board included, she could actually save money, build something for her children's future. But she had to be certain he understood the terms, that there would be no expectations beyond what he'd stated. Mr. Davidson, she began carefully, her hand unconsciously rising to her scarred cheek again. I need to be clear about the nature of this arrangement. I'm grateful for your offer, more than I can express. But I'm here as hired help, nothing more. I can keep your house and cook your meals and help with your daughter as I'm able, but I can't be anything else. I won't be anything else. Cole's expression didn't change. I'm offering employment, Mrs. Hensley, not marriage or anything improper. You'll have your own quarters with a lock on the door if you want it. I'm not looking for a wife. I had a wife and I buried her. I'm looking for someone who can run a household so I can run a ranch. That's all. The bluntness should have been offensive, but Martha found it reassuring. She'd had enough of men who said one thing and meant another, who looked at a desperate widow and saw opportunity for exploitation. This man was offering exactly what he said, nothing hidden, no expectations beyond the work itself. Then I accept your offer, Mr. Davidson, and I'm grateful for it. When would you like me to start? Now, if you're able. Cole gestured to the chaos around them. As you can see, we need help immediately. I'll show you the quarters and help you get your things settled, then leave you to organize as you see fit. Emma will be back by supper time. She'll need to know you're here to stay. Martha turned to her children, who'd been standing silent throughout the entire exchange. Michael, Sarah, Grace, this is Mr. Davidson. We're going to be staying here and helping him with his household. I expect you all to be respectful and helpful, and to remember your manners. Is that understood? Yes, Mamma, they chorused, and Martha saw relief break across their faces like sunrise. They'd been so brave through everything, never complaining even when they'd gone to bed hungry, never crying even when they'd had to leave behind almost everything they'd owned. Now they'd have food and warmth and safety, at least for the winter. It was more than she'd dared hope for when she'd knocked on this door. Cole picked up their 2 carpet bags as if they weighed nothing, which they nearly didn't given how little they'd been able to bring. This way, he said, leading them through the main room to a door near the kitchen. The room beyond was indeed small, perhaps 10 feet square, but it had a real bed with a mattress, a chest of drawers, a small table with a lamp, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. The children's loft is up those stairs, Cole continued, pointing to a narrow staircase in the kitchen. It's mostly used for storage now, but there's floor space and it's warm from the kitchen fire. I can help clear it out and bring up bedding. This is more than adequate, Martha said, setting her bags on the bed. More than adequate. It's generous, Mr. Davidson. It's practical, he corrected. Can't have my household help exhausted from poor sleeping arrangements. You'll work better if you're rested and comfortable. He paused in the doorway. There's a pump in the kitchen for water and an outhouse about 50 yards back. I'll bring in extra firewood tonight so you don't have to haul it. Staples are in the pantry there, and what we don't have, you can make a list and I'll get it next time I'm in town. For tonight, just do what you can. Nobody expects miracles on the first day." After he left, Martha stood in her new room and let herself feel the full weight of relief that wanted to buckle her knees. They were safe. Her children would eat tonight and sleep warm. She had work and wages and a place to be that didn't require her to endure stares and whispers and the constant reminder of everything she'd lost. Cole Davidson had looked at her scarred face and seen a woman who could make biscuits, not a monster or an object of pity. It wasn't love or even kindness really, just simple respect for capability. But after months of being treated as less than human, it felt like a miracle. She unpacked their few belongings quickly, then went to investigate the kitchen and pantry. The stores were good, she noted with approval. Flour, salt, sugar, lard, dried beans, preserved vegetables, smoked meat hanging in the cold room. Cole Davidson might not be able to cook, but he knew how to provision a household for winter. She could work with this. She could make meals that would stick to ribs and warm bellies. She could turn this chaos into a home again, not for herself, but for the man who'd given her family sanctuary when they'd had nowhere else to turn. Michael appeared at her elbow. "Mama, what do you need me to do?" Martha looked at her son, so earnest and determined to help, and felt her heart swell. "Help your sisters clear out the loft space for sleeping. Then, come down and I'll find tasks for everyone. We're going to show Mr. Davidson he made the right choice taking us in." As the afternoon light slanted through the grimy windows, Martha set to work. This was something she understood, something she could control. Her face might be ruined and her husband might be dead, and her old life might be ashes, but she could still make a house clean and a meal hot. She could still provide value through her labour. And if Cole Davidson saw her as nothing more than capable hands and a practical mind, well, that was better than being seen as a scarred ruin of a woman. That was enough. It would have to be enough. The first disaster came on the second morning when Martha discovered Emma's room. She'd spent the previous day and evening cleaning the main areas of the house, scrubbing floors and washing dishes and wiping down surfaces until her hands were raw and her back ached. The children had helped without complaint, Michael hauling water and chopping kindling, Sarah sweeping and dusting, even little Grace doing her best to polish the lower cabinets with a rag. By the time Cole and his daughter had returned from wherever Emma had been hiding, the main room and kitchen gleamed in the lamplight, and a hot supper of beef stew and fresh biscuits waited on the table. Emma had entered silently, a thin slip of a girl with her father's grey eyes and dark hair in 2 braids down her back, her riding clothes dusty and her face closed tight as a fist. She'd looked at Martha once, her gaze sweeping over the scarred face with neither surprise nor pity, just a flat assessment that ended in what looked like dismissal. Then she'd sat at the table and eaten in silence, never once acknowledging Martha's cooking or the transformed state of the house. Cole had thanked Martha for the meal, his words simple and sincere, and that had been the extent of conversation. Now, on the second morning with Cole already gone to work, the cattle with his 2 hands and the children finishing their breakfast, Martha decided to tackle the sleeping quarters. Michael and Sarah's loft space was already clean, the children having organised it themselves with the bedding Cole had provided. Grace still slept in Martha's room, too young to be separated from her mother in a strange place. That left Emma's room, the door to which had remained firmly closed. Martha knocked gently, waited, then knocked again. No response came, but she could hear movement inside. She opened the door slowly, prepared to apologise if Emma was still dressing, but the room was empty. What greeted her instead made her breath catch in her throat. The room was a shrine to grief, frozen in time like a photograph. A woman's dresses still hung on pegs along one wall, their fabric dusty but carefully arranged. A hairbrush sat on a small dresser, strands of dark hair still caught in its bristles. The bed was unmade, its sheets grey with age and use, and the whole room smelled of stale air and sorrow. Dust lay thick on every surface except the bed itself, which showed signs of recent use. Emma was sleeping here, Martha realised with a pang of understanding, in her dead mother's unwashed sheets, surrounded by her mother's things, breathing in the last traces of a woman who'd been gone 2 years. It was grief made physical, loss preserved in fabric and dust, and Martha understood it in her bones because she'd done something similar after her own husband had died, keeping his razor on the washstand for months, unable to bear putting away his Sunday shirt. But this wasn't healthy, not for a child, and not for the household trying to move forward. The sheets needed washing and the room needed cleaning, and those dresses needed to be packed away with respect but finality. Martha opened the window first, letting in fresh October air that smelled of pine and coming snow. Then she began gently gathering the sheets from the bed, folding them carefully. She was halfway through stripping the mattress when Emma's voice cut through the room like a knife. "What are you doing?" The girl stood in the doorway, her face white with fury, her hands clenched at her sides. "Those are my mother's sheets. I'm going to wash them," Martha said gently, keeping her voice calm. "They need cleaning, Emma. It's been too long. You can't touch those." Emma's voice rose, shrill with panic. "You can't touch anything in here. This is my mother's room. Your mother isn't here anymore, sweetheart. These are just things, and things need tending. I'll wash the sheets carefully and put them right back. You're not my mother!" The words exploded from Emma with volcanic force, her face flushing red now, tears starting in her eyes. "You're just the ugly woman Papa hired. You don't get to touch my mother's things or clean her room or tell me what to do. You're nothing. You're just the scarred lady nobody else wanted." The cruelty of it hit Martha like a physical blow, each word finding the tender places she tried so hard to protect. She felt her own face flush, felt the familiar shame rise hot in her throat, the voice in her head that said, "Yes, that's exactly what you are, ugly and unwanted, and lucky anyone will even look at you without flinching." But beneath Emma's cruelty, Martha could see what others might have missed, because she knew grief intimately, knew its many disguises. This wasn't really about Martha's scars or her presence. This was about a little girl so terrified of losing the last traces of her mother that she'd attack anyone who threatened to take them away. This was grief-wearing anger's mask, because anger felt safer than the drowning sorrow underneath. "I know I'm not your mother," Martha said quietly, setting down the sheets. "And I'm not trying to be, but I am here, and part of being here means keeping the house clean and healthy. These sheets need washing, Emma. That's not disrespecting your mother's memory. That's just practical care. Get out," Emma screamed, and now the tears were flowing freely. "Get out of my mother's room. Get out of our house. You don't belong here." Martha left, closing the door softly behind her, and stood in the hallway with her heart pounding and her hand shaking. Sarah appeared at the top of the loft stairs, her young face troubled. "Mama, are you all right?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a misunderstanding. Why don't you and Michael take Grace outside for a bit? Let me handle this." But handling it proved harder than Martha had anticipated. Emma's hostility wasn't a single explosion, but a sustained campaign of small sabotages that made each day a test of endurance. The sugar bowl was switched with the salt, ruining an entire batch of biscuits. Dishes were knocked from the counter and shattered, always when Emma was nearby, but always claimed as accidents. The girl refused to eat anything Martha cooked, sitting at meals in stony silence and leaving the table hungry rather than admit the food was good. When Michael tried to make friendly conversation, Emma ignored him completely. When Sarah offered to show her a game, Emma said coldly that she didn't play with children of hired help. When little Grace smiled at her shyly, Emma turned away as if the child were invisible. The house became a battlefield of silent tensions and slammed doors. Cole was gone from before dawn until after dusk, working the cattle with his ranch hands, riding fence lines, and checking the herd before winter closed in. He came home exhausted, ate whatever Martha put before him with quiet thanks, and seemed oblivious to the cold war being waged under his roof. Or perhaps not oblivious, Martha thought, but uncertain how to address it. What could he say? The girl was grieving and lashing out, and Martha was hired help who'd signed on to keep house, not to mother a hostile child. By the fourth night, Martha lay awake in her small room with Grace sleeping peacefully beside her, and Sarah's breathing soft from the cot they'd set up in the corner. The loft had seemed too far away for the girls in this strange new place, so they'd all crowded into Martha's quarters instead, finding comfort in proximity. Outside, winter wind rattled the window, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. Martha stared at the ceiling and wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The work itself was manageable, even satisfying in its way. She liked bringing order to chaos, liked seeing the house transform under her care, liked the simple rhythm of cooking and cleaning and tending. The wages were fair and the room was adequate and her children were fed and warm. But Emma's hostility was wearing her down in ways she hadn't anticipated, each cruel word and cold stare chipping away at the fragile sense of worth she'd been trying to rebuild. Maybe the girl was right. Maybe she was just the ugly woman nobody wanted. Foolish to think she could make a place for herself here. Maybe her scarred face was so offensive that even a child couldn't bear to look at it without revulsion. Maybe she should take her children and leave before things got worse, before Emma's hatred poisoned everything, before Cole decided that no amount of good cooking was worth the household drama. But where would they go? They had no money yet, no other option. She'd burned her bridges in Kansas, sold everything to pay her late husband's debts. This was their chance, perhaps their only chance, and she couldn't let a grieving child's cruelty destroy it. She had to be stronger than that, had to outlast the hostility, had to prove through sheer persistence that she belonged here by right of her labour, if nothing else. On the 5th night, another disaster struck. Martha had spent the afternoon making a pot roast, one of her best dishes, slow-cooked, with vegetables and herbs until the meat fell apart tender, and the gravy was rich enough to make a grown man weep. She'd set the table carefully, put out fresh bread, made sure everything was perfect. When Cole came in with Emma trailing behind him, the house smelled like heaven. They sat for the meal in the usual tense silence, Martha serving everyone, while her own children waited politely for permission to begin. Cole took his first bite and closed his eyes briefly in appreciation. "This is exceptional, Mrs. Hensley. Best pot roast I've had in years." "Thank you," Martha said, feeling a small glow of pride despite everything. Then Emma spoke. "I'm not eating this." Her voice was flat, final. "I'm not hungry." "You need to eat, Emma," Cole said with the weariness of a man who'd had this argument too many times. "You barely touched breakfast or lunch. I don't like her cooking. It tastes wrong." Cole's jaw tightened. "Emma, that's enough. It doesn't taste like Mama's cooking. It tastes like strangers' food, and I won't eat it." The words were calculated to wound, and they hit their mark. Martha felt her appetite vanish, felt the familiar shame rise again. But before she could respond, before Cole could reprimand his daughter, Michael spoke up, his young voice sharp with anger. "That's cruel and unfair. My mother is a wonderful cook, and you're being hateful for no reason except that you're spoiled and don't know how to be grateful for what you have." "Michael," Martha said sharply, "apologize." "No, Mama, someone needs to say it. She's been awful to you all week, breaking things and being rude and acting like we're not even people. And you just take it because you're kind and patient, but I won't take it anymore. Emma Davidson, you're a spoiled brat who doesn't deserve the good things you have." "Michael Hensley, you will apologize this instant," Martha said, her face burning with embarrassment. "That is not how we speak to others, no matter the provocation." "I won't," Michael said stubbornly. "It's true." Emma's face had gone bright red, tears starting in her eyes. "At least I have a father who wants me. At least I'm not some charity case living on other people's kindness. At least my face doesn't make people look away." "Enough!" Cole's voice cracked through the room like a whip, silencing everyone. "Emma, go to your room, now." "But Papa, she has no right. Now, Emma, we'll talk about this later." Emma fled, her footsteps pounding up the stairs, and then came the slam of her door so hard it shook the house. The silence that followed was suffocating. "I apologize for my son's outburst," Martha said quietly, her hands trembling in her lap. It was disrespectful and inappropriate. "He'll be punished." "And I apologize for my daughter's behavior," Cole replied, his voice heavy with a weariness that went bone deep. "This has been building all week and I've been too focused on work to address it properly." "Michael," his anger spent, now looked miserable. "I'm sorry, Mr. Davidson. I shouldn't have called Emma names. But she's been so mean to Mama, and Mama never says anything back, just takes it all without defending herself. That made me angry." Martha felt tears prick her eyes at her son's fierce defense, at his recognition of her pain even when she'd tried to hide it. "I can fight my own battles, Michael. You don't need to protect me." "But you don't fight them, Mama," Sarah said softly from her place at the table. "You just let people be cruel and you never say anything back." "Not here, not in the towns we pass through, not anywhere. You just accept it like you deserve it." The observation cut deep because it was true. Somewhere along the way, Martha had stopped defending herself, had started to believe that her scarred face meant she deserved whatever cruelty came her way, that she should be grateful for any scrap of kindness and never complain about mistreatment. She'd taught her children to be resilient by example, but what if she'd actually taught them to accept injustice? What if her silence in the face of cruelty wasn't strength but a kind of surrender? The meal continued in uncomfortable silence, everyone picking at food that had lost its appeal. Afterward, Cole helped clear the table, something he'd never done before. "Mrs. Hensley," he said quietly while the children were occupied elsewhere, "might I speak with you privately?" They stepped out onto the porch into the cold October night. The stars were brilliant overhead, sharp and clear in air that tasted of coming snow. Martha wrapped her shawl tighter and waited. "I owe you an apology," Cole said. "I've been absent when I should have been addressing what's happening in my own household. I knew Emma was struggling with your presence, but I didn't realize how bad it had gotten. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Davidson. I signed on to keep house, not to be liked by your daughter. That's where you're wrong." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the starlight. "I hired you to help run this household, and part of that means you need to have authority here. Emma needs to respect you, not as a replacement for her mother, but as the woman who's running our home. If she's sabotaging your work and being cruel, that undermines everything." "It's grief," Martha said softly. "I know grief when I see it." She's terrified of losing the last pieces of her mother. "It is grief," Cole agreed. "But grief doesn't excuse cruelty. Her mother would be appalled at how Emma's been behaving. Rebecca was the kindest woman I've ever known. She would never have tolerated our daughter treating someone the way Emma's been treating you." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "When my wife died, I thought I'd die too. The grief was so heavy I could barely breathe under it. For months I went through the motions of living without actually being alive. Emma was drowning in her own grief, and I couldn't help her because I was drowning myself. I let things slide that I shouldn't have. I let her keep Rebecca's room as a shrine because I couldn't face packing those things away either. I let her grow wild because I didn't have the strength to provide discipline and structure. I failed her as a father, and now she's become someone her mother wouldn't recognize." Martha heard the raw pain in his voice and recognized it as a mirror of her own. "When my husband died," she said quietly, "I kept his things around me like armor. His coat still hung by the door, his pipe still sat on the mantel. I couldn't bear to put them away because it felt like erasing him, like admitting he was really gone. Our baby had died too from the same fever, and everywhere I looked in that house I saw ghosts. My children were grieving and I couldn't help them because I was lost in my own sorrow. Then the scarring happened, and suddenly I had a new kind of grief, mourning the person I'd been before, the face I'd had, the life I'd thought I'd live. I understand what Emma's feeling because I felt it too. This was the most personal conversation they'd had. The first time either had acknowledged their losses to each other directly. It hung between them in the cold air, two people who had survived terrible things and were still trying to figure out how to keep living. "I'm going to talk to Emma tomorrow," Cole said. "She needs to understand that you're here to stay and that she needs to treat you with respect. I'll also start packing away Rebecca's things. It's time. I should have done it a year ago, but I kept putting it off. Maybe we can do it together, you and I, not disposing of her memory, but preserving it properly, putting her dresses in a trunk that Emma can open when she's older, packing away the personal items with care, making that room a place Emma can actually live in instead of a museum to grief. You'd do that. Help me, if you'd like. I know what it's like to sort through a loved one's belongings. It's hard work emotionally. Having someone there who understands might make it bearable." They stood together in companionable silence for a moment, and Martha felt something shift between them. Not attraction or romance, nothing so simple or dramatic, but a recognition of shared experience, of parallel losses that had shaped them in similar ways. They were both survivors, both still carrying wounds that hadn't fully healed, both trying to build something from the wreckage of their old lives. That night, after she'd returned to her room and the children were asleep, Martha heard voices from Emma's room above. The floors were thin enough that sound carried, and though she couldn't make out every word, she could hear the low rumble of Cole's voice and Emma's higher tones, sometimes rising with emotion. She shouldn't listen, knew it was wrong, but she couldn't help herself. "I know this is hard," she heard Cole say, his voice gentle but firm. "I know you miss your mother. I miss her too, every single day. But Emma, what you're doing to Mrs. Hensley isn't fair and it isn't kind, and it needs to stop. She's trying to take Mama's place," Emma's voice thick with tears. "She's trying to make us forget. No, sweetheart. She's trying to help us survive. There's a difference. Your mother is gone, and I know that's the hardest truth you've ever had to face because it's the hardest truth I've ever had to face. But we're still here, still living, and we need help. Mrs. Hensley isn't replacing your mother. She's just doing the work your mother used to do because someone has to do it. The house needs tending. We need feeding. That's not betrayal. That's practical necessity." "But her face," Emma started, and Martha's heart clenched. "She's ugly and Mama was beautiful. That's a cruel thing to say and I'm disappointed to hear it from you." Emma fell silent. "Your mother taught you better than that. She taught you to see people for who they are, not what they look like. Mrs. Hensley's scars don't make her ugly. They make her someone who survived something terrible. And the fact that she's here, working hard every day despite how you've treated her, despite knowing you think she's ugly, that shows more strength than you or I might ever have. Do you understand? There was a long pause, then Emma's voice, very small. I'm scared, Papa. Of what, sweetheart? That if we let her stay, we'll forget Mama? That if we're happy again, it means Mama didn't matter? Oh, Emma. The tenderness in Cole's voice made Martha's throat tight. Being happy again doesn't mean forgetting, it means healing. Your mother would want us to heal. She'd want you to have a clean room and good meals and someone to talk to about girl things that your old father doesn't understand. She'd want you to be kind to people who are trying to help us. Most of all, she'd want you to grow up to be the kind of woman she was, generous and warm and seeing the best in people. Can you try to do that? Can you try to be kinder to Mrs. Hensley and her children? They're going through their own hard times. They lost their father and brother. Mrs. Hensley lost her face to disease. They came here with almost nothing, desperate for a chance, and we have the ability to give them that chance. Your mother would have opened her arms to them without hesitation. Can you try to do the same, even if it's hard? The silence stretched long, and then Emma said quietly, I'll try, Papa. I'm sorry. I know, sweetheart, I know. Martha lay in her bed with tears sliding down her scarred cheeks, but they weren't tears of shame or hurt. They were tears of something else entirely, something that felt almost like hope. Cole had defended her not out of obligation, but out of genuine conviction. He'd recognized her strength, her survival, and named it as valuable. He'd seen her as a person worthy of respect and had demanded his daughter see her the same way. For 2 years, since the smallpox had stolen her face and her husband's death had stolen her security, Martha had been moving through the world like a ghost, accepting whatever scraps of kindness came her way and never expecting more. She'd told herself that her scars meant she deserved less, that she should be grateful for any employer who would tolerate her appearance, that wanting respect or kindness was asking too much. But listening to Cole speak about her with such matter-of-fact dignity, hearing him describe her survival as strength rather than disfigurement, something in her chest began to thaw. Maybe she wasn't just the ugly woman nobody wanted. Maybe she was a survivor, a woman of capability and worth, someone who'd endured terrible things and kept going. Maybe her scars were proof of strength rather than evidence of ruin. The thought was so new, so fragile that she barely dared hold it. But it was there, a small spark in the darkness she'd been carrying. And tomorrow, when Emma came down to breakfast, maybe things would be different. Maybe they could start to build something real here, not just an employer and employee arrangement, but something closer to a household, to a family cobbled together from broken pieces. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but for the first time since arriving, Martha thought it might actually be possible. 2 weeks after the confrontation in Emma's room, Cole announced at breakfast that they'd all be going to town for supplies. We need to stock up before the heavy snows come, he said, pushing back his plate after finishing the bacon and eggs Martha had prepared. Winter can close us in for weeks at a time out here, and I want to make sure we have everything we need. Martha, you should come along and pick out whatever you think the household requires. You know better than I do what we're running low on. Martha's hands stilled on the coffee pot she'd been refilling. Town meant people, meant stares and whispers and the familiar shame that followed her everywhere outside the relative safety of the ranch. She'd been grateful for the isolation these past weeks, for the chance to work without constant reminders of her ruined face. The thought of walking into Morrison's general store, of facing the townspeople's reactions, made her stomach clench with dread. I could make a list, she offered. You could purchase what's needed without me having to come along. I prefer you there to make sure we get the right items, Cole said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Besides, the children should see town, get a feel for the place. We're not hermits, after all. And so they went. All 6 of them crowded into Cole's large wagon with the children in the back and Martha sitting stiffly on the bench beside Cole and Emma. The November morning was cold but clear, the sky a brilliant blue above the mountains that ring the valley. The road into town wound through grassland already gone gold with autumn, past stands of aspen that had lost their leaves, past the occasional ranch house set back from the road. It should have been beautiful, and part of Martha recognized that it was, but her anxiety grew with each mile that brought them closer to Silver Creek. The town itself was small, maybe 300 souls clustered along the main street that boasted a general store, a bank, blacksmith, a church, a schoolhouse and 2 saloons. Buildings of raw lumber stood alongside older log structures, everything practical and plain in the way of frontier settlements, where decoration was less important than function. Wagons and horses lined the street, and people moved about their business with the purposeful efficiency of those who knew winter was coming and preparations couldn't wait. Cole pulled up in front of Morrison's General Store, a 2-story building that also housed the post office and served as the town's unofficial gathering place. Through the large front windows, Martha could see shelves stocked with goods and several people inside already shopping away or gossiping. Her heart began to pound, her palms growing damp despite the cold. "Michael, Sarah, Grace, mind your manners," Martha said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Stay close and don't touch anything unless I say you may." "Yes, Mama," they chorused, and Martha saw Sarah's hand slip into Michael's, the girl seeking comfort from her older brother. Even at 9, Sarah was sensitive to her mother's moods, and she'd picked up on Martha's anxiety. Emma hopped down from the wagon with easy familiarity, clearly comfortable in this town where she'd grown up. She started toward the store, then paused and looked back at Martha, who was still sitting frozen on the wagon bench. "Are you coming, Mrs. Hensley?" The question was neutral, neither kind nor cruel, but it held a note of genuine curiosity. Emma had been notably less hostile since her father's talk with her. Not warm exactly, but no longer actively sabotaging Martha's work. They'd achieved a sort of wary truce, circling each other like cautious animals, testing boundaries. "Yes," Martha said, forcing herself to move. "I'm coming." The moment she stepped through the door of Morrison's General Store, she felt the attention shift to her like a physical weight. Conversations paused mid-sentence, eyes turned her direction. She saw the sequence of reactions she'd come to know too well in the past 2 years, curiosity first, then the moment of recognition as they registered her scars. Then the quickly hidden revulsion. Or pity. Or both. 3 women stood near the fabric section, and Martha recognized the type immediately. Well-dressed by the frontier standards, carefully coiffed hair, the bearing of those who considered themselves the social arbiters of their small community. The one in the centre was particularly striking, perhaps 30 years old, with golden hair and fine features and a burgundy dress that must have cost more than Martha earned in 3 months. Her blue eyes swept over Martha with an assessment that was both thorough and dismissive. "Mrs. Davidson," the woman said warmly, moving toward Emma with outstretched hands. "How lovely to see you, dear. And your father looking so well." Her gaze slid to Cole, and Martha saw something proprietary in it, a claim being staked. "Mr. Davidson, I was just telling Mrs. Morrison how we've missed seeing you at church these past weeks." "Mrs. Pierce," Cole said, with polite neutrality, touching his hat brim. "We've been busy preparing for winter." Of course," Katherine Pierce's smile never wavered, but her eyes had already returned to Martha, cataloguing every detail. "And this must be your new housekeeper. How industrious of you to find help so quickly." "This is Mrs. Hensley," Cole said. "She's been managing the household for a few weeks now. Mrs. Hensley, this is Mrs. Katherine Pierce. She owns the boarding house here in town." The 2 women near Katherine tittered behind their hands, and one of them, a thin woman with a sharp nose, said just loudly enough to be heard, "Well, she certainly looks like someone who'd be grateful for any employment." The cruelty was casual, almost conversational, but it hit Martha like a slap. She felt her face burn, felt the familiar shame rise hot in her throat. Beside her, Sarah made a small sound of distress, and Michael's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Even little Grace pressed closer to Martha's skirts, sensing the hostility even if she didn't fully understand it. "Imagine choosing that for your household," Katherine said to her companions, her voice pitched to Carrie. "I mean, I understand the need for help, but surely there were other options. Options that wouldn't frighten the children, the poor dears, having to look at that face every day. It must be quite distressing." Martha felt something inside her crumble. This was what she'd feared. Bumbisa, the public confirmation that she was too ugly to be tolerated, that her presence was an offence to normal people's sensibilities. She should leave, should take her children and wait in the wagon while Cole did the shopping. She'd been foolish to think she could walk into town without facing this kind of reaction. She turned toward the door, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall, but Cole's voice stopped her. "Tom," he called out to the storekeeper, a balding man in his 50s who had been watching the exchange, with obvious discomfort. "You tasted those biscuits Mrs. Hensley sent with me last week, didn't you?" Tom Morrison looked startled to be drawn into the conversation, but he nodded. "I did indeed, Mr. Davidson. Best biscuits I've had in years." if I may say so. Light as air, but with substance to them. My wife's been after me to find out the recipe." Cole moved to stand beside Martha, and she felt his hand settle briefly on her shoulder, a touch that was both reassuring and claiming. "Beauty's easy to find in this territory," he said, his voice carrying through the now silent store. "Half the women here are pretty enough, but a woman who can feed a working ranch through winter, a woman who can make biscuits that don't break teeth and stretch supplies to feed 6 people and keep a house running smooth as clockwork, that's rare as gold, and any man with sense knows it." The silence that followed was absolute. Katherine Pierce's face had gone rigid, her smile frozen in place. The women beside her looked uncertain, caught between their instinct to follow Katherine's lead and the reality of Cole Davidson, one of the most respected ranchers in the valley, publicly defending his housekeeper. Martha felt his hand squeeze her shoulder once before releasing it, and in that brief touch she felt something she hadn't expected. Not pity, not obligation, but genuine respect. He meant what he was saying. This wasn't charity or politeness. He actually valued her work, her capability, and he was willing to say so publicly, even if it meant contradicting the social hierarchy these women represented. "Now," Cole continued, his tone shifting back to business, "Mrs. Hensley needs to select supplies for the household. Tom, I trust you'll give her your full attention and put everything on my account. Whatever she thinks we need, we'll take." "Of course, Mr. Davidson," Tom said quickly, relief evident in his voice at having clear direction. "Mrs. Hensley, please, let me know what you require." Martha found her voice, though it shook slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I have a list." She pulled the carefully written paper from her pocket, grateful to have something to focus on besides the stares still boring into her back. As she moved through the store with Tom, discussing quantities of flour and sugar and coffee, discussing the quality of various fabrics for winter clothes for the children, she was acutely aware of the whispered conversations happening behind her. Katherine Pierce had gathered her followers close, their voices too low now for Martha to make out words, but the tone was clear enough. They were regrouping, adjusting their attack, and Martha knew this wasn't over. Emma had disappeared into the back of the store where penny candy was kept, but now she returned to Martha's side. "Mrs. Hensley," she said quietly, "Papa keeps accounts at the dry goods store too. We should get fabric there. They have better selection than here." It was the first time Emma had voluntarily spoken to Martha in anything approaching a helpful manner, and Martha understood what the girl was really offering: an escape, a reason to leave Morrison's store and the hostile women within it. "Thank you, Emma, that's good to know. We'll go there next." They completed their purchases quickly, Tom Morrison helping carry everything to the wagon with almost apologetic efficiency. As they loaded the supplies, Martha saw Katherine Pierce emerge from the store, her face composed but her eyes hard as flint. She approached Cole directly, ignoring Martha entirely. "Cole, I was hoping we might speak privately. There's a matter concerning the church social next month." "I'm rather busy today, Katherine," Cole said, not unkindly but with clear finality. "Perhaps another time. It's about the planning committee. We're selecting members, and I thought you might want to have input, given your standing in the community." "I'll leave that to you and the others," Cole replied. "I'm sure you'll make fine decisions without me." Katherine's smile tightened. "Of course. Though I must say I'm surprised you didn't consult the community before bringing in outside help. We have several local girls who could have used the employment, girls from good families who've fallen on hard times. And Mrs. Hensley isn't from a good family?" Cole's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "I wouldn't know her background," Katherine said with false sweetness. "She arrived with no references, no history that anyone knows. For all you know, she could be anyone, running from anything. Some of us are concerned about the influence on impressionable young Emma. That's quite enough," Cole said, his tone sharp enough to cut. "Mrs. Hensley's background is her own business, and my household arrangements are mine. I'll thank you to keep your concerns to yourself." He turned to Martha, who'd been standing frozen by the wagon, feeling each word like a blade. "Mrs. Hensley, are we finished here?" "Yes, Mr. Davidson. Then let's go. We have other stops to make." They left Katherine Pierce standing in the street, her beautiful face twisted with something ugly that her careful manners couldn't quite hide. Martha settled back onto the wagon bench, her children climbing into the back, and Emma surprisingly chose to sit in the back with them, rather than on the bench. As Cole guided the horses down the main street toward the dry goods store, Martha finally found her voice. "You didn't have to do that. Defend me publicly. I know it'll make things difficult for you socially." "I did have to," Cole said flatly. "Katherine Pierce is a busybody who's been trying to get her hooks into me since Rebecca died. She brings me pies and casseroles and shows up at church in her finest dresses, batting her eyes and talking about how hard it must be for me raising Emma alone. She's been angling for a proposal for 2 years, and she saw you as competition the moment you stepped off that wagon." "But I'm not competition," Martha said, confused. "I'm hired help. Katherine doesn't see it that way. She sees a woman in my household, managing my home, cooking my meals, spending time with my daughter. That's everything she's been trying to position herself to do, and you're doing it without even trying. That makes you a threat to her plans. And the other women, the cruel comments about my face?" Cole's jaw tightened. Cruelty for cruelty's sake following Katherine's lead because she sets the social tone in this town. It's petty and small and I won't tolerate it. "You work hard, Mrs. Hensley. You've brought order to my household and peace to my home. You've been patient with Emma even when she didn't deserve it. You've earned respect, and I'll make sure you receive it." They completed their shopping at the dry goods store and the feed and grain, and at each stop Martha noticed a pattern. Word had already spread about the confrontation at Morrison's. Some people were clearly curious, staring openly at Martha and whispering. Others, particularly some of the working women and ranch wives, offered her small nods of acknowledgement or even brief smiles. One older woman, weathered by years of frontier life, stopped Martha as she was examining fabric. "Don't let Katherine Pierce get under your skin, dear. That woman's been a thorn in this town's side since her husband died and left her well off. She thinks money makes her better than honest working folks. You hold your head up." Martha was so surprised by the kindness that she could only nod her thanks, her throat too tight for words. On the ride home, as the afternoon sun slanted low across the grassland, the children chattered in the back of the wagon about the sights they'd seen and the penny candy Emma had surprisingly shared with them. Martha sat in silence, processing everything that had happened. Cole had defended her publicly, had claimed her work as valuable, had shut down Katherine Pierce's subtle attacks with directness that left no room for misinterpretation. He'd made it clear that Martha's position in his household was secure, and that he wouldn't tolerate gossip or cruelty directed at her. It was more than she'd expected, more than she'd dared hope for, but it also complicated things in ways she hadn't anticipated. Katherine Pierce was right about one thing. Martha's presence in Cole's household did look like more than simple employment to outside observers. A woman keeping house for a widower, living under his roof, managing his home and helping raise his daughter. It looked like courtship, like a prelude to marriage, even though nothing could be further from the truth. They'd barely spoken beyond household necessities. Their relationship was entirely professional, but perception mattered in small towns, and the perception was clearly that Martha Hensley had designs on Cole Davidson. The thought was almost laughable. What man would want a wife with a face like hers? What man would choose scars and ugliness when he could have someone like Katherine Pierce, beautiful and wealthy and socially connected? Cole had defended her work, her capability, but that didn't mean he saw her as anything more than useful help. Still, as the wagon rolled through the gathering dusk toward the ranch that had become home, Martha allowed herself a moment of gratitude. For 2 weeks she'd worked in isolation, protected from the world's cruelty by distance and Cole's absence. Today had forced her back into public view, had reminded her of exactly how others saw her, but it had also shown her something unexpected. Cole Davidson was a man who said what he meant and meant what he said. When he called her work valuable, when he named her capability as rare as gold, he'd been telling the truth as he saw it. And if his truth didn't include seeing her as beautiful or desirable, well, that was fine. She'd long ago accepted that beauty was lost to her, but being seen as capable, as worthy of respect and fair treatment, that was something she could hold on to. That was a foundation she could build on. Emma's voice drifted forward from the back of the wagon. "Papa, why was Mrs. Pierce so mean to Mrs. Hensley? Some people are mean when they're jealous or threatened, Emma. It's not an admirable quality, but it's a common one. What was she jealous of? Mrs. Hensley has something Mrs. Pierce wants. And what's that?" Cole glanced at Martha, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "She has a place in our household, Emma. She's made herself essential through hard work and genuine care. Some people would rather try to tear others down than build themselves up through honest effort. Mrs. Pierce is one of those people." "Oh," Emma fell silent for a moment, then said, I like Mrs. Hensley's cooking better than Mrs. Pierce's pies anyway. Mrs. Pierce's pies are always too sweet and the crust is tough." Martha felt a smile tug at her scarred lips despite everything. It was perhaps the closest thing to a compliment Emma had offered, this comparison of pies, and it was delivered with such casual certainty that it felt genuine rather than calculated. "Thank you, Emma," she said over her shoulder. "That's kind of you to say." "It's just true," Emma replied. "Mrs. Pierce can't cook as good as you. Papa only ate her pies to be polite, but I saw him give most of it to the dog when he thought no one was looking." "Emma," Cole said, but there was amusement in his voice rather than reprimand. "Well, it's true. Rex wouldn't even eat all of it, and he eats anything." The children giggled at that, and even Martha felt some of the day's tension ease from her shoulders. They'd survived the town visit. She'd faced the stares and whispers and outright cruelty, and she'd survived it. More than that, she'd learned that she had an unexpected defender in Cole Davidson, a man who valued work over beauty and capability over social standing. It wasn't romance or love or anything so complicated. It was something simpler and perhaps more solid. It was respect, earned and given, freely, and in Martha's current circumstances, that felt like more than enough. As the ranch house came into view, its windows already glowing with the lamp Emma had lit before they'd left that morning, Martha felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. A sense that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where her scars didn't define her entire worth. Where what she could do mattered more than how she looked doing it. The wagon pulled into the yard, and Cole set the brake. "Home," he said simply. And Martha realized with a start that it was true. This place, this ranch, this household of broken people piecing themselves back together, it had become home in a way nowhere else had been since she'd lost her husband. She climbed down from the wagon, her children spilling out after her, already talking about what they'd help unload first. Emma hopped down and surprised Martha by saying, "I'll help put away the dry goods. You'll want them organised proper. Thank you, Emma, I'd appreciate that." As they worked together unloading supplies, carrying them into the house, finding places for everything in the pantry and storage areas, Martha caught Cole watching her once with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't attraction or romance, but it was something, recognition maybe, or appreciation, or simply the acknowledgement that they'd both survived a difficult day and come through it intact. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Martha sat at the kitchen table with her mending, working by lamplight to repair a tear in Michael's shirt. She heard Cole's footsteps before she saw him, and looked up to find him standing in the doorway. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for handling today with such dignity. I know it wasn't easy. You've faced worse than small-town gossip, I'm sure, but it's never pleasant." "Thank you for defending me," Martha replied. "You didn't have to speak up, but I'm grateful you did." "I did have to," Cole repeated what he'd said earlier. "You're part of this household now, Mrs. Hensley. What affects you affects all of us, and I meant what I said about your work being valuable. I've eaten well and slept easy knowing the house is in capable hands. That's not something to dismiss." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Katherine Pierce will likely make trouble. She's not the type to accept defeat graciously. If she or anyone else gives you difficulty, I want you to tell me. You shouldn't have to face that alone." "I can handle whatever comes," Martha said quietly. "I've learned to endure. There's a difference between enduring and being supported," Cole said. "You don't have to face everything alone anymore." The words settled between them, simple but weighted with meaning. Martha met his eyes and saw genuine concern there, genuine solidarity. They were both alone in different ways, both carrying grief and loss, both trying to build something from what remained. Maybe that shared understanding was enough to build a different kind of partnership, one based not on romance, but on mutual respect and common purpose. "Thank you, Mr. Davidson. That means more than I can properly express." Cole nodded, then turned to go, but paused in the doorway. "One more thing, Mrs. Hensley. Tomorrow I'm having Tom Morrison spread the word that anyone who wants to do business with me needs to treat my household with respect. That includes you and your children. I won't have my ranch hands or business associates thinking they can be cruel without consequence." "That's not necessary," Martha started, but he cut her off. "It is necessary. I should have done it from the start. I won't have gossip and cruelty poisoning my household." He disappeared into the darkness of the hallway, leaving Martha alone with her mending and her thoughts. She picked up Michael's shirt again, her needle moving with automatic precision through the fabric, but her mind was far away. Something had shifted today. Some boundary had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Cole had claimed her publicly as part of his household, had defended her worth, had made it clear that attacking her meant attacking him. It was protection, yes, but it was also a kind of declaration. She belonged here now, not just as hired help, but as something more integral, more permanent. The thought should have terrified her. She'd learned not to count on permanence, not to trust in security that could be stripped away by fever or fire or the simple cruelty of fate. But sitting in the warm kitchen, with the smell of bread she'd baked earlier still lingering in the air, with the sounds of sleeping children drifting from above, with the memory of Cole's hand on her shoulder in Morrison's store, Martha allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Safe, not loved, not desired, not beautiful, but safe, valued, respected for what she could do and who she was beneath the scars. And for now, for tonight, that was enough. That was everything. The fever came on suddenly, as fevers always did, transforming Grace from a laughing child at supper to a burning, whimpering bundle by bedtime. Martha had put her down in the small room they shared, tucking the quilts around her small body, kissing her forehead as she did every night. But an hour later, Grace had called out, her voice thin and frightened, and when Martha rushed to her side, she had felt the heat radiating from her daughter's skin like a stove. No. The word was a prayer, a plea, a denial of what her hands were telling her. Not again. Not this. Please, God, not this. She'd lost too much to fever already. 8 months ago, almost to the day, she had watched her husband Thomas burn with it, watched him thrash and mutter and fade despite everything she'd done, every cool cloth she'd pressed to his skin, every prayer she'd whispered. And their baby, little James, barely 6 months old, had followed his father into death 3 days later, his tiny body unable to fight what his father couldn't survive. The smallpox had come after, sweeping through their Kansas town like divine judgment, and Martha had nursed the sick even as the disease claimed her face, stealing her beauty, but leaving her alive, scarred and hollow and wondering why God had let her survive when he'd taken everyone she loved most. Now Grace lay fevered in the bed, and all those memories crashed over Martha like a wave. Her hands shook as she fetched cool water and cloths. Her breath came short and panicked as she stripped Grace down to her shift and began sponging her small body, trying to bring down the heat that made the child's skin feel like touching embers. It's all right, sweetheart. Mama's here. You're going to be fine. The words felt like lies. She'd said the same things to Thomas, to baby James, and they died anyway. Fever was a lottery, random and cruel, and Martha knew better than most that prayers and nursing didn't always save the ones you loved. She'd learned that lesson in blood and loss, had paid for that knowledge with scars inside and out. Grace whimpered and tossed, her small face flushed, her eyes glassy when they opened. Mama, I'm hot. I know, baby. I know. I'm going to make you cooler. Just rest now, just let Mama take care of you. Through the hours of deep night, Martha worked with the desperate efficiency of someone who'd done this before, who knew exactly what to do but also knew it might not be enough. She sponged Grace's burning skin. She got her to sip water when she was lucid enough. She changed her shift when sweat soaked it through. She sang the old lullabies her own mother had sung to her, the ones she'd sung to all her children, the ones that had echoed through too many sick rooms in her short life. Hush, little baby. Don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. Her voice cracked on the words, tears streaming down her scarred cheeks, her whole body shaking with the effort of staying calm when everything inside her screamed with terror. If that mockingbird don't sing, Mama's gonna buy you a diamond ring. She'd failed before. She'd tried so hard and it hadn't mattered. Thomas had died. James had died. What if her best wasn't good enough again? What if morning came and Grace was cold instead of hot, still instead of restless? What if God took this child too and left Martha with nothing but more grief to carry? If that diamond ring turns brass, Mama's gonna buy you a looking glass. The song broke on a sob and Martha buried her face in the cloth she'd been using to cool Grace's forehead. She couldn't do this. Couldn't survive losing another child. She'd barely survived losing James. If Grace died, something in Martha would die too, some final piece of herself that had held together through everything else. She didn't hear Emma approach, didn't realize the girl was there, until her voice came soft from the doorway. My mama used to sing that song. Martha's head jerked up hastily. wiping at her tears, though there was no hiding them. Emma stood in her nightgown, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her face young and uncertain in the lamplight. She looked perhaps 12 instead of 10, hovering in that space between child and something older, between needing comfort and offering it. "I couldn't sleep," Emma continued, taking a tentative step into the room. "I heard you singing and I remembered. Mama used to sing that song to me when I was little, when I was sick or scared or couldn't settle. Her voice would make everything feel safer." Martha managed to find her voice. "It's a good song. My mother sang it to me too. I've sung it to all my children. Is Grace very sick?" Emma moved closer, her eyes on the small form in the bed. "Yes," Martha said honestly. "She has a high fever. I'm trying to bring it down, but fevers are dangerous. They can turn bad quickly, like when my mama died." Emma's voice was very small. "She had fever too. Childbed fever. Papa said there was nothing anyone could do, that it just took her." Martha felt her heart clench for this girl who had watched her mother die, who understood too young what loss meant. "Yes, like that. I'm sorry, Emma. I know how much you must miss her. Do you think Grace will die?" The question was asked with a child's brutal directness, no softening or euphemism. Martha wanted to lie, to offer false comfort, but something in Emma's eyes demanded honesty. "I don't know. I'm doing everything I can, but sometimes fever wins no matter what we do. I lost my baby son to fever 8 months ago. I know what it's like to fight and lose anyway. But I'm not giving up on Grace. I'll fight all night if I have to." Emma stood silent for a long moment, then said quietly, "Can I sit with you? You don't have to. You should sleep. I can't sleep anyway, and maybe 2 people fighting is better than 1. The simple offer, the willingness to sit vigil with her, broke something loose in Martha's chest. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, and Emma pulled a chair close to the bed, settling in with the grave seriousness of a child trying to be useful. They worked together in silence for a while, Martha sponging Grace's skin while Emma carefully held the basin of water, changing it out when it grew warm from use. The quiet house around them felt like its own world, separate from daylight and ordinary concerns, existing in that suspended space that sickness created, where nothing mattered except the breathing of the patient and the slow passage of minutes toward dawn. Finally Emma spoke again. "Tell me about your baby, about James." Martha's hand stilled on the cloth. She rarely spoke of James, found it too painful to put words to that particular loss. But something about the darkness, about Emma's quiet presence, about the shared vigil over Grace made the words come easier than they usually did. He was 6 months old when he died. The sweetest baby, always smiling, always reaching for you with his little hands. He looked like his father, same dark eyes, same serious expression even when he was tiny. Thomas, my husband, doted on him, used to carry him around the house, singing to him in this terrible off-key voice that made the baby laugh. Martha paused, swallowing hard. Thomas got sick first. We thought it was just a bad cold, but the fever came on so fast. Within 2 days he was delirious. Within 4 he was gone. I tried everything. Cool cloths, willow bark, tea, prayers. Nothing worked. And then James got it. And I knew what was coming, but I couldn't accept it. I held him and rocked him and sang to him, and he just got worse and worse until finally he stopped crying, stopped moving, just stopped. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. After they died, I had to keep going for Michael and Sarah and Grace. I had to bury my husband and baby, had to settle his debts, had to figure out how to survive, and then the smallpox came through town and I got it. Most people who survived it weren't scarred too badly, but I was. The disease took my face the way the fever took my family. When I looked in the mirror afterward, I didn't recognize myself. Everyone in Kansas looked at me differently after, like I was a ghost of who I'd been, like the disease had killed the real Martha Hensley and left this scarred stranger in her place. Emma was quiet, processing this. Then she asked, with the directness that seemed to be her nature, "Does it hurt? Your face?" "Not anymore. The physical pain faded months ago. But people's stares do. Every time someone flinches when they see me, every time a child points and whispers, every time I catch someone looking away quickly like the sight of me is unbearable, it hurts. Not the same way the disease hurt, but in a different way, like being reminded over and over that I'm not who I used to be, that I'm less than I was, that I'm ugly now and always will be." "You're not ugly," Emma said, and Martha looked at her in surprise. "You're just scarred." "There's a difference, is there?" "People don't seem to think so." Emma frowned, seeming to think about this. "When my mama was sick, near the end, she looked terrible. Her skin was grey and she was so thin and her eyes were all sunken. But she was still beautiful to me because she was my mama. I think maybe beauty is about more than just what someone looks like. It's about who they are underneath. That's a kind thought, Emma, but most people don't see it that way. Maybe most people are stupid then." Martha felt a startled laugh escape her despite everything. Maybe they are. They fell silent again, both focused on Grace, who seemed to be resting more quietly now, her thrashing stilled though the fever still burned. Martha sponged her small body with methodical care, watched the rise and fall of her chest, counted each breath as a small victory. "What was your mama like?" Martha asked after a while. Emma's face softened at the question. She was wonderful, kind to everyone, always helping neighbours, always making our house feel warm and happy. She could make anything beautiful, even simple things. She'd put wildflowers on the table and suddenly the whole room felt special. She taught me to sew and to cook, though I wasn't very good at either. She never got impatient when I made mistakes. She'd just laugh and say mistakes were how we learned. Emma's voice grew thick with tears. When she died, it felt like all the colour went out of the world. Everything was grey and cold and nothing made sense. Papa was so sad he could barely look at me for weeks because I reminded him of her. The house got messy and meals were terrible, and I started doing things I shouldn't do because I was angry that she left me. I know she didn't choose to leave, but I was angry anyway. I understand that anger, Martha said quietly. When Thomas and James died, I was furious with them for leaving me alone, even though I knew it wasn't their fault. Grief makes us feel things that don't make sense. It's all right to be angry. It's all right to miss her. It's all right to want things to be different. Do you still miss your husband? Every day. I miss what we had, the life we were building together. I miss his voice and his laugh and the way he'd come in from work and swing Grace up in the air until she squealed. I miss the person I was when he was alive, before the scarring, before I had to become hard enough to survive on my own. Emma was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've been mean to you because I was scared." "Scared of what? That if I liked you, it meant I was forgetting Mama. That if we all got used to you being here, we wouldn't miss her anymore. That she'd just disappear like she was never important." Martha set down her cloth and turned to face Emma fully. "Listen to me carefully, Emma. Nothing and no one can replace your mother. She was your mama and she always will be. You'll carry her with you your whole life, in your memories and in the things she taught you and in the way she loved you. I'm not here to make you forget her. I'm here because your father needed help and I needed work, that's all. If we become friends along the way, that doesn't diminish your mother's memory. It just means you have room in your heart for more than one person. Hearts are big like that. They can hold love for people who are gone and people who are here without one cancelling out the other. But you were so patient with me even when I was awful to you. Why didn't you fight back? Because I understood," Martha said simply. "I saw a girl who was grieving and scared and angry, and I recognised those feelings because I'd felt them all myself. Fighting back would have just made things worse. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone in pain is to be steady and patient and wait for them to find their way through it, even when they're cruel to you. Even then, though I'll admit it was hard. Some of the things you said hurt quite a bit." "I'm sorry," Emma whispered, tears spilling over. "I'm so sorry for calling you ugly and being mean and breaking things on purpose and all of it. I was wrong. You've been nothing but good to us and I was horrible." Martha reached out and took Emma's hand, squeezing gently. "I forgive you. People do hurtful things when they're grieving. What matters is that you recognise it and want to do better. That's all anyone can ask." They sat holding hands across Grace's sickbed, two people who'd both loved and lost, both carried scars that others couldn't fully see, both trying to navigate a world that had turned out to be crueler and harder than they'd expected. In the lamplight, with the house quiet around them and Grace breathing steadily between them, something shifted and settled into place. "Can I tell you something?" Emma asked. "Of course, when Papa defended you in town, when he told Mrs. Pierce that you were valuable and important, I was surprised. But then I realised he was right. You are important. You've made our house feel like a home again. There are clean sheets and good meals, and everything's organised and peaceful. Even Papa seems less sad than he used to be. You did that. Not because you're pretty or charming or any of the things. Mrs. Pierce is. but because you work hard and care about doing things right and you're patient even when people don't deserve it, that's worth more than a pretty face." Martha felt tears slip down her cheeks again, but these were different than the earlier tears of fear. These were tears of gratitude, of unexpected connection, of being seen and valued by someone she'd thought might never accept her. "Thank you, Emma. That means more to me than you know. I mean it. And I'm going to be better from now on. I'm going to help you more and be nicer to Michael and Sarah and Grace. I'm going to make Mama proud of the person I'm becoming, and that means being kind like she was." "I think your mother would be very proud of you right now," Martha said. "It takes courage to apologize and to want to change. That's a very grown-up thing to do." The hours passed slowly, the two of them keeping watch together, talking sometimes and sitting in comfortable silence at other times. Emma told stories about her mother, memories that she'd been holding close, and Martha listened and asked questions that showed she understood how precious these stories were. Martha talked more about her life before, about Thomas and James and the children, about Kansas and the journey west, about what it was like to wake up one day and not recognize your own face in the mirror. As the darkness outside began to shift toward the grey of pre-dawn, Grace stirred and opened her eyes. Her forehead, when Martha touched it, felt cooler. Not normal yet, but no longer burning. The fever was breaking. "Oh, thank God," Martha breathed, fresh tears starting. "Thank you, God, she's better." Emma leaned forward anxiously. "The fever's breaking. She's going to be all right. She's going to be all right." Martha gathered Grace into her arms, holding her close, breathing in the smell of her hair, feeling the blessed coolness of her skin. Her baby was going to live. This time her prayers had been answered. This time fever hadn't won. "Mama," Grace murmured, still half asleep. "I'm here, baby. Mama's here. Everything's all right now." Emma slumped in her chair, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The vigil had lasted all night, and in the growing light Martha could see the dark circles under the girl's eyes, the weariness in her small frame. "Come here," Martha said softly, shifting to make room. Emma hesitated only a moment before moving to sit beside Martha on the bed. Martha put her free arm around the girl's shoulders, and Emma leaned into her, her head coming to rest against Martha's shoulder. They sat like that as dawn broke outside the window, Martha holding her daughter in one arm and Cole's daughter in the other. 3 people who'd all survived their own kinds of fever, their own kinds of loss, finding comfort in shared warmth and shared survival. That was how Cole found them when he came looking for Emma, worried when he'd found her bed empty. He stopped in the doorway of Martha's room, taking in the scene. Grace asleep in Martha's lap, clearly past the worst of whatever had ailed her. Emma curled against Martha's side, also asleep now, her young face peaceful in a way Cole hadn't seen since Rebecca died. And Martha, exhausted and tear-stained and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with her scarred face and everything to do with the fierce protectiveness in her eyes, the tenderness in the way she held both children, the strength that radiated from her despite obvious weariness. She looked up and met his eyes, and something passed between them in that moment, some understanding that went beyond words. She'd fought for his household through the night, had cared for his daughter, had opened her heart despite all the reasons she had to keep it closed. He saw her fully in that moment, not as hired help or as a scarred woman to be pitied, but as someone extraordinary, someone who'd survived terrible things and remained capable of such gentleness, such fierce love. "The fever broke," Martha whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of singing and crying. "Grace is going to be fine." "And Emma?" Cole's voice was equally quiet. "She sat with me all night. We talked. Really talked. She's a wonderful girl, Cole. You've done well with her." Emma stirred at the sound of her father's voice, blinking awake. She looked up at Martha, then over at her father, and something in her expression had changed. The hardness was gone, the anger that had driven her for so long dissolved by a night of shared vulnerability and honest conversation. "Papa," she said softly, "Mrs. Hensley lost her husband and baby to fever too. She knows what it's like." "I know, sweetheart. Come on, let's let Mrs. Hensley get some rest. She's been up all night." Emma stood reluctantly, then surprised them both by turning back to Martha and giving her a quick, fierce hug. "Thank you for taking care of Grace, and thank you for talking to me, for understanding. You're very welcome, Emma. Thank you for sitting with us. It helped more than you know." After Cole led Emma from the room, Martha sat holding Grace for a long time, watching the sunrise paint the sky outside her window in shades of pink and gold. She was exhausted, emotionally wrung out, her eyes gritty from crying and lack of sleep. But beneath the weariness, she felt something else. Peace, maybe, or the beginning of it. She'd faced her greatest fear and come through it. Grace had survived, and in the process, she'd found an unexpected connection with Emma, a bridge built from shared grief and honest conversation. The household that had felt so fragile, so tentative, now felt like it might actually hold. Like they might actually be able to build something real here, something that could withstand the storms that life inevitably brought. Grace stirred in her arms, opening her eyes more fully now. "Mama, I'm here, baby. How do you feel?" "Tired. And thirsty. That's the fever breaking. Let's get you some water and then you can sleep properly." As Martha tended to her daughter, helping her drink and settling her back into bed, she felt gratitude wash over her so strongly it was almost overwhelming. Gratitude for Grace's recovery, for Emma's breakthrough, for Cole's quiet understanding in the doorway, for this household that had somehow become a sanctuary. She'd come here expecting only employment, a practical arrangement to keep her children fed and housed through winter. But she'd found something more, something she hadn't dared hope for. She'd found a place where her scars didn't define her, where her losses were understood rather than pitied, where her strength was valued and her gentleness appreciated. She'd found people who were learning to see past surfaces to the person underneath, who were willing to build something together from their broken pieces. It wasn't what she'd lost. It could never replace Thomas or baby James or the life she'd planned before fever and disease had stolen it all. But it was something. It was enough. And for the first time in 8 long months, Martha Hensley allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be happy again someday. Not the same kind of happy she'd been before, but a different kind, built on different foundations, shaped by loss but not destroyed by it. As she finally lay down beside Grace, too exhausted to stay upright any longer, Martha thought about Emma's words. "You're not ugly. You're just scarred. There's a difference." Maybe the girl was right. Maybe scars were just evidence of survival, proof that she'd fought battles and lived to tell about them. Maybe her face told a story of endurance rather than ruin. Maybe she'd been seeing herself through the wrong eyes all along, judging herself by standards that didn't actually matter, letting cruel strangers define her worth instead of trusting the people who actually knew her. Cole had called her work rare as gold. Emma had called her important. Her children looked at her with love rather than revulsion. Maybe those were the eyes that mattered. Maybe those were the mirrors she should be looking in. The thought was so new, so fragile that Martha barely dared hold it. But it was there, a seed planted in fertile ground waiting to grow. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her, knowing that when she woke there would be work to do and meals to cook and a household to tend. But also knowing that she wouldn't be doing it alone anymore, wouldn't be fighting every battle by herself. She had allies now, unexpected and hard-won, but real. She had Emma's fierce loyalty and Cole's steady support and her own children's unwavering love. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to build a future on. The snow came early that year, arriving in mid-November with a violence that surprised even the old-timers who claimed to have seen everything Montana weather could throw at them. Martha woke to an unnatural silence, the kind that meant fresh snow had fallen in the night, and when she pulled back the curtain to look outside, she gasped at what she saw. The world had disappeared. Everything beyond the window was white, snow falling so thick she couldn't see past the porch, wind driving it sideways in sheets that obscured even the barn 50 yards away. The sound of it was constant, a roar like water rushing, and when she pressed her hand against the window glass, she felt the cold radiating through despite the fire that had burned all night in the main room. "We're snowed in," Cole said from behind her, and Martha turned to find him already dressed, his face serious. "This is a bad one. 3-day storm if I'm reading the signs right, maybe longer. We'll need to ration firewood carefully and make sure the animals in the barn have enough feed and water to last. I'll need to get out there this morning before it gets worse, make sure everything's secure." "You can't go out in this," Martha said, alarmed. "You'll get lost between here and the barn. I've got a rope line strung for exactly this reason. I'll tie on and follow it there and back. But you're right that it's dangerous. If anything happens to me, the rope leads back to the house. Don't come looking for me, just wait. I'll either make it back or I won't." The bluntness should have been frightening, but Martha understood it was just practical honesty. This was frontier life, where weather could kill you as easily as disease or accident, where survival meant respecting the power of nature and preparing for the worst. She nodded, already mentally cataloguing their supplies, calculating how long they could last if the storm went on for days. Cole went out into the blizzard, the door nearly torn from his hands by the wind when he opened it, snow blasting into the house in the seconds before he got it. Closed again. Martha stood at the window watching from him, though she could see nothing but white, her heart in her throat until finally, nearly an hour later, he stumbled back through the door, coated in snow, his face red with cold but his eyes relieved. "Animals are secure," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "Barn's solid. We should be fine as long as the storm doesn't last more than 4 or 5 days. 4 or 5 days trapped inside with 6 people in close quarters." Martha had grown used to the rhythms of the household, the way Cole left early and returned late, giving her space to work without his constant presence. Now they'd all be confined together, and she felt a flutter of anxiety at what that might mean. Would the children drive each other mad with cabin fever? Would Emma's newfound acceptance fray under the strain of forced proximity? Would the careful boundaries between Martha and Cole blur in uncomfortable ways? But as the first day of the storm wore on, Martha discovered that the forced closeness created something unexpected. Not tension, but warmth. A sense of being bound together not just by walls and weather, but by shared purpose and growing connection. Cole set up his account books at the big table and called Michael over. "If you're going to help run a ranch someday, boy, you need to understand the business side. Come here and I'll show you how we track expenses and income, how we calculate profit margins on cattle sales." Michael's face lit up with the eager attention of a boy being treated like a man, and he settled beside Cole with fierce concentration. Martha watched from the kitchen where she was preparing bread dough, saw the patience in Cole's manner as he explained columns of numbers and the logic behind various decisions, saw Michael's quick mind grasping concepts that would serve him well, whatever future he built for himself. Meanwhile, Emma appeared at Martha's elbow. "Can I help with the baking? I want to learn to make bread as good as yours." "Of course," Martha said, making room at the counter. "First thing is getting the dough the right consistency. Too wet and it won't rise properly. Too dry and it'll be dense as a brick. You have to learn the feel of it." They worked side by side, Martha's scarred hands guiding Emma's smaller ones through the process of kneading, feeling the dough transform from sticky mess to smooth elastic. Emma asked questions constantly, absorbing information like a sponge. And when the loaves finally went into the oven, she stood watching through the door with the pride of someone who'd accomplished something real. Across the room, Sarah had taken it upon herself to teach Grace her letters, using a piece of charcoal and a slate to draw out the alphabet. Grace's serious little face as she copied each letter was so earnest it made Martha's heart swell. Her children were thriving here, growing in ways they hadn't been able to in the desperate months after Thomas's death when they'd all been just trying to survive. The blizzard howled outside, but inside the house there was light and warmth, and the comfortable sounds of people working together. It felt, Martha thought with some surprise, like a family. Not replacing the families they'd each lost, but creating something new from the pieces that remained. That evening they gathered around the table for supper, and the meal felt different than the tense, silent affairs of those first weeks. Emma ate Martha's cooking with obvious enjoyment, even asking for seconds of the stew. Michael talked excitedly about what he'd learned from Cole about ranch finances. Sarah demonstrated Grace's progress with letters. Cole listened to it all with a small smile that softened his usually serious face, and when his eyes met Martha's across the table, she saw something in them that made her breath catch. Contentment, maybe, or gratitude, or something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. After supper, Cole surprised everyone by suggesting they share stories. "My father used to say that long winter nights were made for storytelling. Each person tells something, true or made up. Doesn't matter which. We'll go around the table." The children were delighted by this idea, and soon the room filled with their voices. Grace told a rambling story about a rabbit who befriended a bear. Sarah recounted a memory of her father taking her fishing. Michael shared an adventure story he'd read in the book. Emma, after some hesitation, told about a time her mother had taught her to make jam, and they'd ended up with it everywhere, in their hair and on the walls, laughing until they cried. When it was Martha's turn, she told about growing up in Pennsylvania, about her father who'd been a carpenter and could make anything with his hands, about learning to cook from her mother, who'd believed that food made with care could heal both body and soul. She spoke of happier times before loss had marked her and found that the memories didn't hurt quite as much as they once had. She could remember the good now without being swamped by grief over all that had been taken. Cole's story was about learning to work cattle as a young man, about a particularly stubborn bull that had led him on a chase across half the territory before he'd finally gotten it back where it belonged. He told it with dry humour that had the children laughing, and Martha found herself watching his face, seeing the person beneath the weathered exterior, the man who'd survived his own losses and was trying, like her, to build something from what remained. The second day of the storm followed a similar pattern. The snow showed no signs of letting up, the wind still howling, the world beyond the window still lost in white. But inside they curated their own small universe. Cole continued teaching Michael, moving from finances to the practical details of cattle ranching, drawing diagrams of pasture rotation and explaining the signs of healthy versus sick animals. Martha and Emma baked again, this time cookies that filled the house with the smell of cinnamon and sugar. Sarah read aloud from one of Cole's books while Grace played with her doll nearby. In the afternoon, Martha settled by the fire with a basket of mending, the endless task of keeping 6 people in clothes that weren't falling apart. She'd just started on a pair of Cole's work pants, the knee worn through, when Emma brought her own mending over and sat beside her. "Will you teach me to do invisible mending?" Emma asked. "Mama could mend so you couldn't see where the tear had been, but I never learned how." Martha showed her the technique, the tiny stitches that caught just the surface of the fabric, the way to match thread colour perfectly, the patience required to do it right. As they worked together, Emma said quietly, "I'm glad you're here, Mrs. Hensley. I know I didn't act like it at first, but I am. Our house feels like a home again. Thank you, Emma. That's kind of you to say, it's true. And I've been thinking about what you said, about hearts being big enough to hold love for people who are gone and people who are here. I think you were right. I still miss Mama every day, but I also like having you here. Those two things don't cancel each other out." Martha felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Your mother would be proud of how wise you're becoming." That night, after the children had finally been persuaded to bed, after the house had grown quiet except for the storm's constant roar, Martha found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and went to the main room, intending to sit by the banked fire for a while, but found Cole already there. He sat in one of the chairs pulled close to the hearth, staring into the glowing coals, and looked up when she entered. "Can't sleep either. Too much time sitting still today, I think. My body doesn't know what to do with itself when I'm not working every minute." Cole smiled faintly. "I know the feeling. I'm used to being outside from dawn to dusk, 3 days trapped indoors, and I'm climbing the walls." Martha settled into the chair beside his, pulling her shawl tighter against the chill that seeped in around the edges of the room. The fire's warmth didn't quite reach everywhere, leaving pockets of cold that reminded her winter was just beginning, that they'd have months more of this before spring came again. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both watching the fire, and then Cole spoke. "I want to thank you for what you've done with Emma. The change in her is remarkable. She's more like the girl she was before Rebecca died, before grief turned her angry and difficult. Emma just needed time and understanding, and someone to see past her anger to the hurt underneath. You saw it when I didn't. I was so caught up in my own grief that I couldn't see hers clearly. I thought I was being a good father by giving her space, by not pushing her to talk about things she didn't want to discuss. But really I was just avoiding the hard conversations because I didn't know how to have them." "Grief makes everything harder," Martha said quietly. "It clouds our judgment, makes us second-guess every decision. You did the best you could, and that's all anyone can do." Cole was quiet for a moment, then said, "I thought I'd die alone after Rebecca, not literally, though Lord knows I considered it in those first dark months, but emotionally. I figured I'd failed as a husband since I couldn't save her, that I didn't deserve to have anything good again. I'd just work the ranch and raise Emma as best I could, and eventually die a bitter old man who'd forgotten how to feel anything but loss." The raw honesty of it made Martha's heart ache. "We can't save people from fever or fate, Mr. Davidson. You couldn't have saved your wife any more than I could have saved my husband or son. We can only save ourselves from giving up, from letting grief turn us so bitter and hard that we stop being able to feel anything else." Cole looked at her then, really looked at her, and in the firelight his eyes were soft. "Call me Cole. We've been living under the same roof for nearly 2 months now. I think we can dispense with the formality." Martha felt something shift in her chest at the invitation, the informality of it suggesting a relationship that went beyond employer and employee. "All right, Cole." He smiled, a real smile that transformed his whole face, making him look younger, less burdened. "There. That wasn't so hard, was it?" "No," she admitted, "it wasn't." "Tell me something, Martha." He leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed. "How did you end up in Kansas? You mentioned Pennsylvania earlier. That's a long way to travel." "I was engaged to a man there," Martha said, the old shame rising but not overwhelming her the way it once had. "James Peterson, the banker's son. He was handsome and educated and everything a young woman was supposed to want. We were to be married in the spring, but then the smallpox epidemic came through town." She paused, gathering herself to tell a story she rarely shared. "I was nursing the sick, helping wherever I could. That's how I caught it. James came to see me while I was recovering after the fever had broken, but before I'd seen my face. He seemed nervous, kept fidgeting with his hat. Finally, he said he'd been thinking, and perhaps we should postpone the wedding until I was fully recovered. I thought he was being thoughtful, giving me time to heal. And then you saw your face," Cole said quietly, understanding where the story was going. "And then I saw my face. The scars were extensive, much worse than most survivors had. Half my face was ruined, or so it seemed to me then. When James came back a week later, he couldn't look at me. He stood in my parents' parlour and told me he'd prayed about it and felt God was releasing him from our engagement, that he couldn't marry a woman who looked like that people would talk and it wouldn't be good for his career at the bank. He made it sound almost holy, his abandonment of me, like he was following divine guidance rather than his own shallow vanity." Martha shook her head at the memory. "I was devastated. Not because I loved him so deeply, I realise now, but because his rejection confirmed what I'd feared when I'd first seen my reflection, that I was unlovable like this, that no man would ever want me, that my face had stolen my chance at the life I'd planned." "What happened then?" Cole asked. "I spent months feeling sorry for myself. Then Thomas Hensley moved to town, a widower with a young son looking for a fresh start. He needed help in his carpentry shop, someone to keep the books and manage the front of the business. I needed work. We became friends first, then something more. He proposed 6 months after we met, and I told him no 3 times before I finally believed he meant it, that he actually wanted to marry me despite my face. And he was a good husband, the best. He never once made me feel less than beautiful. He'd trace my scars with his fingers and say they were proof of my courage, my survival. He taught me that a real love sees beyond the surface. We had 8 years together before the fever took him, and I treasure every one of them." Cole was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "This James Peterson," he finally said, his tone carefully neutral. "He was a fool." Martha felt a small, surprised laugh escape her. "That's kind of you to say. I'm not being kind. I'm being accurate. Any man who couldn't see past skin to the woman beneath doesn't deserve the title of man. Real strength, real beauty, that comes from character, from how you treat people, from what you do when life gets hard. Your scars don't make you less beautiful. If anything, they prove you're stronger than most people ever have to be." The words settled over Martha like a warm blanket sinking in deep. She'd heard similar sentiments from Thomas, but coming from Cole, from this practical, plain-spoken rancher who didn't waste words on empty flattery, they carried a weight that made her breath catch. "Thank you," she managed. "That means more than you know." Cole shifted in his chair, leaning forward slightly. "Can I ask you something? What made you come all the way to Montana? That's a long journey for a woman alone with 3 children. "Desperation," Martha said honestly. "After Thomas died, the debts came due. He'd borrowed money to expand the business, investments that would have paid off if he'd lived, but became crushing obligations when he died. I sold everything we owned to pay what we owed, which left us with almost nothing. I tried to find work in Kansas, but people didn't want to hire me. Too ugly to work in shops where I'd be seen, too scarred to be a schoolteacher where parents worried I'd frighten their children." Her voice grew bitter despite her attempts to stay neutral. "I answered an advertisement for a housekeeper in Illinois, travelled all the way there only to have the woman take one look at me and say she couldn't possibly have someone like me in her home. What would the neighbours think? That happened 3 more times, in 3 different towns. Each time I used precious money for travel, each time I was rejected the moment they saw my face. We were running out of options and the children were hungry, and I was starting to think maybe I should leave them somewhere safe and just disappear. Let them have a chance at decent lives without a scarred mother dragging them down. "Martha," Cole said, his voice rough with something that might have been anger or pain. "But then I saw your advertisement. You specified you wanted someone capable, someone who could manage a household. You didn't mention appearance at all, which every other advertisement had. Pretty girl wanted or attractive woman preferred or must be presentable. Your words were different, so I used the last of our money to get to Montana, figuring if this didn't work, we were finished anyway. When you looked at my face and asked if I could make biscuits, I knew I'd finally found someone who saw past the scars to what I could actually do. I'm glad you came," Cole said quietly. "Selfishly glad because I needed you and didn't even know how badly until you got here. But also glad for your sake, because you deserve to be somewhere you're valued for who you are." They fell into silence again. But it was different now, charged with understanding and connection. Martha felt the walls she'd built around herself, the defenses she'd erected to protect against further hurt, beginning to crack. This man beside her, this weathered rancher with his own scars and losses, saw her, really saw her. Not the ruined face or the desperate widow, but the capable woman beneath, the survivor, the person she was trying to become. "Can I tell you something I haven't admitted to anyone?" Cole said after a while. "Of course, I was attracted to Katherine Pierce for about 5 minutes after Rebecca died. She's beautiful and accomplished, and she made it very clear she was interested. Part of me thought maybe I should just marry her. Give Emma a mother, have someone to share the burden with. But every time I considered it seriously, I felt sick, because I knew it would be a lie. I didn't love her. I didn't even like her much once I got past the pretty exterior. She's shallow and vain, and she treats people poorly when she thinks no one important is watching. I saw her be cruel to a Mexican woman in town once, dismissive and condescending, and I knew I could never respect someone like that, let alone love them." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I thought maybe I was broken, that losing Rebecca had killed my abilities to feel attraction or love, that I'd spend the rest of my life alone, not because I chose it, but because I was incapable of anything else. But then you came here, and I started noticing things. The way you hum while you work, the patience you show with all 4 children, treating them each according to their needs. Your laugh, which I don't hear often enough, but which transforms your whole face when I do. The intelligence in the way you manage household accounts, calculating feed costs faster than I can, and catching errors I would have missed." Martha's heart was pounding now, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "I'm not saying they're well," Cole continued, frustration creeping into his voice. "I'm not a man of pretty words. But what I'm trying to say is that you've reminded me I'm not broken, that I can still feel things, still notice someone, still want to know them better. And it has nothing to do with what you look like and everything to do with who you are." "Cole," Martha breathed, not sure what to say, how to respond to something she'd never expected to hear again. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know our arrangement is professional. I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable or pressure you into anything. I just wanted you to know that you're valued here. Not just for your work, but for yourself. You matter, Martha. To this household, to Emma, to me. You matter to me too," Martha said, the words coming before she could second-guess them. "This household, these past months, they've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. Purpose, yes, and security. But also a sense of belonging somewhere, of being part of something larger than just survival. I wake up in the morning and I'm not just getting through another day, I'm actually living again." They sat looking at each other, across the small space between their chairs, and Martha felt the air itself seem to thicken with possibility. This wasn't romance, not yet, not the swept-away passion feel of youth. This was something deeper and more enduring, built on shared loss and mutual respect, on understanding earned through hardship, on seeing each other clearly, and choosing connection anyway. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney, and the spell broke gently. They both looked back at the flames, but something had fundamentally shifted between them. The boundaries that had kept them carefully separate, employer and employee, widower and a widow, had blurred into something more complex and honest. "Tell me about Rebecca," Martha said softly. "If you'd like to. I've heard Emma's stories, but I'd like to hear yours." Cole's face softened at the invitation. She was the best person I've ever known, truly good in a way most people only pretend to be. She saw the best in everyone, even when they didn't deserve it. She could make a house feel like a home just by being in it, could make the hardest work feel easier just by working alongside you. When she died, the light went out of everything. What would she think of me being here? Martha asked, suddenly needing to know. Cole didn't hesitate. She'd be grateful. Rebecca would have loved knowing Emma was being cared for, that the house was being tended, that I wasn't drowning in grief and neglect anymore. She'd probably laugh at how long it took me to find help, how stubborn I was about admitting I needed it, and she'd like you, I think. She always appreciated capable women who didn't suffer fools gladly. I wish I could have known her. Me too. You would have been friends, I think. They talked through most of the night, the conversation wandering from topic to topic with the easy flow of people who discovered they could be honest with each other. Martha told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, about her dreams before life had redirected them so dramatically. Cole talked about building the ranch from nothing, about his own parents who died in a cholera outbreak when he was 20, about the loneliness of frontier life that Rebecca had transformed into something bearable, even beautiful. When the first grey light of dawn began to seep through the windows, they both stirred, surprised to find the whole night had passed. "The children will be up soon," Martha said reluctantly, not quite ready for this interlude to end. "And I should check on the animals again, make sure they made it through the night all right." But neither of them moved immediately, both savouring these last moments of quiet intimacy before the demands of the day reasserted themselves. "Martha," Cole said, his voice serious, "thank you for tonight, for listening, for sharing, for being someone I can talk to honestly." "Thank you for the same," she replied. "It's been a long time since I could talk to someone like this." They rose together, and for a moment stood close enough that Martha could feel the warmth radiating from him. Her heart beat faster, and she wondered if he might touch her, if he might take her hand or brush her cheek. But he didn't, and she was both disappointed and relieved. Whatever was growing between them needed time, needed to develop naturally, without rushing into something neither of them was quite ready for. Cole stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "I should let you get started on breakfast. The children will be hungry, and I need to brave the storm again. Be careful out there. Always am." He moved toward the door, pulling on his heavy coat and gloves, but paused before going out into the blizzard that still raged. "Martha, yes, I meant what I said. About you mattering. Don't forget that. I won't. And Cole, you matter too." His smile in response was small but genuine, warming her more than the fire ever could. Then he was gone into the white, and Martha was left alone with her thoughts and the strange, fragile hope blooming in her chest. The third day of the blizzard passed much like the first two, the household settling into rhythms that felt increasingly natural. But everything was different now, at least for Martha. She was acutely aware of Cole's presence, noticed the way he smiled when Emma said something clever, the patience he showed teaching Michael, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to little Grace. She caught him watching her sometimes, his expression thoughtful, and wondered if he was experiencing the same confusion of feelings, the same cautious hope mixed with fear of being hurt again. They were careful around each other, both aware that something had changed, but neither quite ready to name it or act on it. The children noticed nothing, too absorbed in their own activities and the novelty of being snowbound. But Martha felt it in every interaction, every time their hands brushed passing a plate at dinner, every time their eyes met across the room. By the fourth morning, the storm had finally blown itself out. The silence when Martha woke was profound, no wind howling, no snow battering the windows. She pulled back the curtain to find the world transformed, buried under drifts that reached the eaves in places, everything sculpted into fantastic shapes by wind that had finally exhausted itself. "We'll need to dig out," Cole said at breakfast, already planning. "The barn first, make sure we can get to the animals and start clearing paths. It'll take days to get back to normal, but at least we can begin." "I'll help," Michael offered immediately, eager to prove himself useful. "Me too," Emma added. "I can shovel as well as anyone." Martha watched them all rally together, this makeshift family that had formed from necessity but was becoming something more substantial, something chosen rather than simply endured. And when Cole's eyes met hers over the children's heads, she saw in them the same careful hope she felt blooming in her own chest. Whatever was growing between them, it would develop slowly, carefully, built on the foundation they'd laid during 3 days trapped by snow. It wouldn't be rushed or forced. It would unfold naturally, honestly, in its own time. And for the first time since Thomas had died, since the smallpox had stolen her face and her future, Martha Hensley allowed herself to believe that maybe she could have something good again. Not the same as what she'd lost, but different, built on different strengths, shaped by shared survival and mutual understanding. Maybe she could be loved again, not despite her scars, but including them, by a man who saw past surfaces to the woman beneath. A man who valued capability and character over beauty, who understood loss because he'd lived it too, who was willing to build something new from broken pieces. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. But as she watched Cole help the children bundle up for work outside, as she saw the way Emma looked at him with trust and affection, as she felt the warmth of this household wrapping around her like a blanket, Martha decided it was a thought worth holding on to, worth believing in, worth fighting for if it came to that. The blizzard had passed, but it had left more than just snow in its wake. It had forced them all together in ways that revealed truths they might have taken months to discover otherwise. And in the intimacy of those confined days, something precious had taken root, something that might just grow into exactly what they all needed if they were brave enough to let it. Spring came to Montana with the sudden violence of ice breaking on a river, winter's grip releasing all at once to reveal muddy earth, and the first brave shoots of green grass pushing through last year's dead stalks. The snow melted in rushing torrents that turned every creek into a river and every low spot into a lake, and the air filled with the sound of returning birds and the smell of wet earth and growing things. Martha stood on the porch one April morning, breathing in air that tasted of possibility, watching the mountains lose their white caps day by day as warmth crept higher into the peaks. The winter had been long and hard, but they'd survived it together, this household of 6 that had become something she'd never expected. A family, not by blood or marriage, but by choice and shared experience and the slow building of trust through countless small kindnesses. Emma had bloomed like the spring flowers, her earlier hostility replaced by genuine affection for Martha and her children. She helped with cooking and cleaning without being asked, taught Sarah and Grace songs her mother had taught her, and had taken to calling Martha by her first name with an ease that suggested she'd stopped seeing her as hired help and started seeing her as something closer to a second mother. Michael had grown taller over the winter, his voice beginning to crack and change, and Cole had taken to consulting him on ranch decisions as if he were a junior partner rather than a boy. The two of them would ride out together in the mornings, checking on cattle that had survived the winter, planning for spring calving, and Michael would return glowing with pride at being treated like a man. Cole himself had changed too, or perhaps Martha had simply learned to read him better. He smiled more often now, real smiles that reached his eyes and transformed his weathered face. He lingered at meals, contributing to conversations instead of eating in silence. He'd started bringing her small things from town, practical items she'd mentioned needing, but also occasionally something frivolous like a tin of tea that cost more than it should, or a ribbon for Grace's hair. Nothing romantic exactly, but thoughtful in ways that made Martha's heart beat faster, that suggested she occupied more of his thoughts than simple household management would require. They'd fallen into the habit of sitting together by the fire after the children went to bed, talking about everything and nothing, sharing the kind of easy companionship that Martha had once had with Thomas, but had thought she'd never find again. Cole told her about his dreams for expanding the ranch, about wanting to improve the cattle bloodlines, about building a legacy that Emma could inherit and be proud of. Martha shared her hopes for the children's futures, her desire to see them educated and settled into good lives, her quiet pride in how resilient they'd proven themselves to be. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, Martha mending, while Cole worked onto account books, the quiet intimacy of shared space needing no words. Neither of them had spoken directly about what was growing between them, the affection that felt increasingly like something deeper. Martha told herself it was enough to have friendship and respect, that she shouldn't hope for more, that Cole was probably just being kind to a woman who worked hard and managed his household well, but sometimes she'd catch him watching her with an expression that made her wonder if maybe, possibly, he felt something of what she was beginning to feel. A warmth when their hands accidentally brushed, a pleasure in her company that went beyond practical appreciation, a tenderness in how he spoke to her that suggested she'd become important to him in ways neither of them quite knew how to acknowledge. It was into this careful, hopeful spring that Katherine Pierce arrived like a late frost, intent on destroying what was growing before it could fully bloom. Martha was in the garden, working to clear away winter's debris and prepare the soil for planting, when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the morning sun, and felt her stomach clench when she recognised Katherine's fine buggy with its matched horses. Beside Katherine sat Sheriff Tom Morrison, his expression uncomfortable, and Martha knew immediately that whatever brought them here wasn't good. "Cole," she called toward the barn where he and Michael were working, "you have visitors." Cole emerged from the barn, took one look at who'd arrived, and his face went carefully blank in the way it did when he was angry but controlling it. He walked to meet the buggy, Martha following a few steps behind, wiping dirt from her hands on her apron. Emma appeared from the house, Sarah and Grace trailing after her, all three girls sensing something wrong and clustering protectively near Martha. Katherine descended from the buggy with theatrical grace, her spring dress clearly expensive, her blonde hair perfectly arranged despite the journey from town. She looked like a fashion plate, beautiful and pristine, and Martha was suddenly acutely aware of her own appearance. Work-worn dress, dirt under her fingernails, hair escaping from its practical bun, and of course the scars that would never allow her to be anything but ugly next to someone like Katherine Pierce. "Mr. Davidson," Katherine said with false warmth. "Sheriff Morrison and I have come on a matter of some delicacy. Might we speak privately?" "Anything you need to say can be said here," Cole replied, his voice flat. "This is my property and these are my people. Whatever concerns you have, we'll address them in the open." Katherine's smile tightened, but she nodded as if this was exactly what she'd expected. "Very well. The sheriff and I have been made aware of certain concerns regarding the welfare of the children in your household. Multiple townspeople have expressed worry about the influence of Mrs. Hensley on impressionable young minds." "What concerns?" Cole's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "Be specific." Sheriff Morrison shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. "Now, Cole, you know I don't put much stock in gossip, but Mrs. Pierce here has raised some points that as sheriff I'm obliged to investigate. There's been talk about Mrs. Hensley's background, her arriving here with no references, the influence on young Emma particularly. Emma's influence is her own business," Cole said coldly. "And Mrs. Hensley came with the best reference there is, her own capability and character." But Katherine wasn't finished. Her voice took on a tone of false concern, sweet as poisoned honey. "We all witnessed Emma's rebellious behaviour in the fall, Cole. The poor child was clearly acting out, clearly distressed. And now we're to believe that a woman who appeared from nowhere, a woman with no verifiable history, has somehow reformed her? It seems more likely that she's manipulated the situation to her own advantage." Martha felt the words like blows, each one designed to wound, to plant doubt, to destroy the security she'd built here. She wanted to defend herself, but her voice seemed frozen in her throat, all the old shame rising up to choke her. "Mrs. Pierce, what exactly are you accusing Mrs. Hensley of?" Sheriff Morrison asked, sounding tired. "I'm suggesting that a desperate woman, a woman with no prospects and 3 children to feed, has positioned herself in a vulnerable man's household and is taking advantage of his grief and loneliness." Katherine's eyes were hard despite her sympathetic tone. "I'm suggesting that she has designs on his property and is using the children to secure her position." Emma's sudden change of heart is suspicious. Children are easily manipulated by adults who know how to play on their emotions. "That's a lie," Emma shouted, her face flushed with anger. "She's not manipulating anyone. She's the best thing that's happened to us since Mama died. She works harder than anyone I've ever seen, and she's kind and patient, and she's never asked for anything except to do her job. You're just jealous, because Papa values her, and won't give you the time of day." "Emma," Cole said, his voice carrying a warning, "that's enough. But it's true, Papa, Mrs. Pierce has been trying to get you to marry her for years, and you won't. And now she's trying to ruin everything because Martha makes our house happy again." Katherine's beautiful face twisted with something ugly. "You see, Sheriff, the child is clearly under this woman's influence. She's been taught to disrespect her elders, to speak out of turn. This is exactly the kind of corrupting influence I'm talking about." "My daughter speaks her mind because I raised her to think for herself," Cole said, his voice like ice. "That's not corruption, that's intelligence. And she's right that you've been angling for a proposal that will never come, Mrs. Pierce. I suggest you accept that and stop trying to destroy a good woman's reputation out of spite." "I am trying to protect you," Katherine protested. "Can't you see she's using you? A desperate widow with a ruined face and no prospects suddenly installed in your household, spending your money, influencing your daughter. What will people think when they hear you've been living under the same roof all winter with an unmarried woman? Your reputation will be in tatters." "Let them think what they want," Cole said flatly. Anyone with sense knows Mrs. Hensley has brought nothing but good to this household. But the seed was planted now, the suggestion out in the open, where it would spread like poison through the community. Martha could see it in the sheriff's uncomfortable expression, in the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. The scandal of it. A widower and a widow living in close quarters all winter, unchaperoned, improper. Never mind that it had been completely innocent, that Martha had her own quarters, and Cole had never been anything but respectful. The appearance was what mattered, in small-town gossip, and the appearance could be twisted to look sordid if someone wanted to see it that way. Sheriff Morrison cleared his throat. "Cole, you know I respect you, but Mrs. Pierce has a point about propriety. Having an unmarried woman in your household, it doesn't look right." "People talk. Let them talk," Cole repeated. But his voice had lost some of its certainty, and Martha saw something flicker across his face. Doubt, maybe, or calculation. He was realizing what she'd already understood. Katherine had won. Even if the sheriff left without doing anything, even if Cole defended her perfectly, the damage was done. The gossip would spread. Martha's reputation, already fragile because of her scars, would be shredded. Parents wouldn't want their children around someone accused of being a scheming opportunist. The town would turn against her completely. She'd have to leave, take her children and go, start over somewhere else with even less than she'd had when she'd arrived. "Cole," Martha said quietly, finding her voice at last. "It's all right. I understand. I'll pack our things and be gone by tomorrow." "No," Cole said sharply. "Absolutely not. But the sheriff is right about propriety. I don't want to cause you trouble or harm your standing in the community. We'll go quietly and there won't be any more gossip." "You're not going anywhere," Cole said, and there was something fierce in his voice now, something that made everyone fall scant. "Mrs. Hensley works harder than any ranch hand I've employed. She's brought order to chaos, healing to grief, and hope to this household. She's been nothing but honourable, and decent and good, and I won't have her driven away by malicious gossip and jealous schemes." He turned to face Katherine directly, his anger no longer controlled but burning cold and bright. "You want to know why I've never accepted your advances, Mrs. Pierce? It's not because I'm too grief-stricken to notice you. It's because I see exactly who you are beneath the pretty face and expensive dresses. You're cruel and petty, and you measure people's worth by their appearance and social standing instead of their character. You're everything my Rebecca wasn't, everything I'd never want in a wife or a mother for my daughter, and if anyone questions Mrs. Hensley's character again, they'll answer to me." The silence that followed was absolute. Katherine had gone pale, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Sheriff Morrison looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him. The children stood frozen, eyes wide, and Martha felt tears start to slide down her scarred cheeks because Cole was defending her, was standing up for her in a way no one had since Thomas died. But Cole wasn't finished. He turned to Martha and his expression softened, filled with something that looked almost like tenderness. "And since you're all so concerned about propriety," he said, his voice carrying across the yard, "Mrs. Hensley has agreed to become my wife." Martha gasped, the sound loud in the shocked silence. They'd never discussed marriage, not once. They'd danced around their growing feelings but never named them, never taken that step. This was coming from nowhere, a public declaration that left her reeling. Cole met her eyes, and in his gaze she saw an unspoken question, an appeal. He was asking her to trust him, to go along with this, but there was something more there too. Something real beneath the tactical declaration. This wasn't just about protecting her from gossip or shutting down Katherine's schemes. This was Cole finally admitting what had been growing between them all winter, what neither of them had been brave enough to say out loud. He was offering her not just protection but partnership, not just security but something that looked remarkably like love. The moment stretched, everyone waiting for her response. Martha thought about all the reasons she should say no. They hadn't courted properly. They'd known each other only 6 months. People would say he was settling for damaged goods, that she'd trapped him, that he was making a mistake. But she also thought about winter nights by the fire, about conversations that lasted until dawn, about the way he looked at her like she mattered, like her scars didn't define her worth. She thought about Emma's transformation, about Michael's pride in being treated like a man, about Sarah and Grace thriving under this roof. She thought about how this place had become home, how this family had become hers, and she thought about Cole himself, steady and honest and good, a man who valued capability over beauty, who'd defended her publicly multiple times, who saw her for who she was beneath the damaged surface. A man who'd lost as much as she had and was brave enough to risk his heart again. She nodded, tears falling freely now, and whispered, "Yes." Cole's face transformed with relief and something deeper, warmer. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides and took her hands in his, dirt and all, not caring that everyone was watching. "You mean it? You'll marry me?" "Yes," Martha said more clearly now, her voice steady despite the tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." Emma let out a whoop of joy that startled everyone. Sarah and Grace started jumping up and down. Michael grinned so wide it looked like his face might split. And Cole, this reserved, controlled man who rarely showed emotion, pulled Martha into his arms right there in front of God and the sheriff and Katherine Pierce, holding her like she was something precious he'd finally claimed. "Well," Sheriff Morrison said, clearing his throat roughly, "I guess that settles the propriety question then. Congratulations to you both." Katherine stood rigid, her beautiful face frozen in shock that was rapidly turning to humiliation. "This is ridiculous. You can't possibly be serious. You're marrying her out of spite to prove a point. You'll regret this, Cole Davidson." Cole released Martha but kept her hand in his, turning to face Katherine with cold finality. "I'm marrying her because she's the best woman I've ever known, next to my late wife. I'm marrying her because she makes this house a home. I'm marrying her because my daughter loves her, and my life is better with her in it. And I'm marrying her because I want to, because somewhere over this winter I fell in love with her capability and her strength and her quiet courage, and I'd be a fool to let her go." The declaration left everyone speechless. Cole had never been a man of flowery speeches, and this sudden torrent of honesty was shocking in its intensity. Martha felt her heart swell so large it seemed impossible her chest could contain it. "You'll be a laughingstock," Katherine said desperately, playing her last card. "Marrying a scarred woman when you could have anyone. People will say you've lost your mind, that grief has made you irrational. People can say what they want," Cole replied evenly. "I stopped caring about gossip the day I buried my wife. The only opinions that matter are those of people I respect, and those people will be happy for us." He looked at the sheriff. "Tom, I appreciate you coming out here, but as you can see, there's no problem to investigate. Mrs. Hensley will be Mrs. Davidson soon enough, and anyone who has concerns about that can take them up with me directly." Sheriff Morrison nodded, looking relieved the situation had resolved itself. "Fair enough, Cole, and for what it's worth, congratulations. Mrs. Hensley, I apologize for the intrusion. This was all a misunderstanding." "No harm done, Sheriff," Martha managed, though her voice shook slightly. "Thank you for your concern." Katherine climbed back into her buggy with rigid dignity, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. "You'll regret this," she said again. "Both of you." "I doubt that," Cole replied. "Have a safe journey back to town, Mrs. Pierce." They watched the buggy depart, Katherine's back ramrod straight, the sheriff looking supremely uncomfortable beside her. When they were finally out of sight, Emma launched herself at Cole and Martha, throwing her arms around them both. "You're really getting married? Really and truly?" "Really and truly," Cole confirmed, smiling down at his daughter. "If Martha's still willing after I put her on the spot like that." Martha laughed through her tears. "You could have asked me privately first, given me time to prepare an answer." "Would the answer have been different?" Cole asked, and there was real vulnerability in his eyes, real fear that she might say yes. "No," Martha admitted. "The answer would have been yes either way, but I might have had time to make myself presentable before accepting." Cole's hand came up to cup her scarred cheek, the gesture so gentle it made her breath catch. "You are presentable. You're beautiful. And I'm sorry I didn't ask you properly, didn't court you the way you deserve. But when Katherine stood there trying to ruin you, trying to drive you away, I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't lose you." "You're not losing me," Martha said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." Michael cleared his throat awkwardly. "So does this mean we're all going to be a real family now? Like, officially?" "Officially," Cole confirmed. "If that suits everyone." The children's enthusiastic agreement was unanimous and loud, and Martha found herself surrounded by all 4 of them, everyone talking at once, making plans and asking questions and expressing delight. Over their heads, her eyes met Cole's, and what passed between them needed no words. This was real. This was happening. 2 broken people who'd survived terrible losses were choosing to build something new together, not to replace what they'd lost, but to create something different, something equally precious. Later, after the children had finally been persuaded to go inside and give them a moment alone, Cole and Martha stood together in the spring sunshine. "I meant what I said," Cole told her quietly, "about falling in love with you. It wasn't just for show, wasn't just to shut Katherine up. I've been falling for months now, probably since that first blizzard when we talked all night, maybe before. I just didn't have the courage to say it." "I've been falling too," Martha admitted. "I kept telling myself it was impossible, that you were just being kind to your housekeeper, that I shouldn't hope for more, but every day it got harder to pretend what I felt was just gratitude or friendship." Cole took both her hands in his. "I know this isn't how proposals usually happen. I should have flowers and poetry and a ring. I should have courted you properly, taken you to dinner, made romantic gestures." "You've been making romantic gestures all winter," Martha said. "Every time you brought me something from town, every time you sat with me by the fire, every time you defended me publicly, every time you treated me like I mattered. That's romance, Cole, real romance, not flowers that die in a week, but steady, consistent care." "You deserve flowers too, though," Cole said. "You deserve all of it. A proper courtship and a fancy wedding, and people celebrating instead of gossiping. I don't need any of that. I just need you, and the children, and this life we're building together. That's more than enough. When should we marry?" "Soon, I hope. I don't want to give Katherine time to spread more poison or for people to start talking again." "As soon as possible," Martha agreed. "We can have a simple ceremony here at the ranch. Nothing fancy, just family, and maybe a few friends." Cole smiled. "Family. I like the sound of that. Me too." Martha reached up to touch his face, marveling that she was allowed to do this now, that this good man wanted her despite everything. "Thank you for defending me, for choosing me, for seeing past my scars to who I am underneath. Your scars don't diminish you, Martha. If anything, they make you more beautiful because they prove you're a survivor. They prove you're strong enough to endure anything life throws at you and still keep going. That's the kind of woman I want beside me, the kind of mother I want for Emma, the kind of partner I want to build a life with." The words settled into Martha's heart like seeds in fertile soil, taking root, beginning to grow. For 2 years she'd believed her scars made her unlovable, unmarriageable, worthy only of pity or revulsion. But Cole saw them differently. He saw them as proof of strength, as badges of survival, as part of the whole person he'd chosen to love. She stood on her toes and kissed him, soft and brief but real, a promise of more to come. Cole's arms came around her, holding her close, and for the first time since Thomas died, since the smallpox stole her face, since her old life shattered beyond repair, Martha Hensley felt completely and utterly safe. Not just physically safe, though she was that too, but emotionally safe. Safe to be herself, scars and all. Safe to hope for happiness. Safe to love again without fear that it would be stripped away. Safe to believe that maybe, just maybe, the best parts of her life weren't behind her but ahead, waiting to be built with this good man and these beloved children. That's how Emma found them minutes later, still wrapped in each other's arms, both of them crying a little and smiling a lot. She stood watching for a moment, then said quietly, "Mama would approve. She'd say you deserve to be happy again, Papa, and Mrs. Hensley, I mean Martha, she'd say you're exactly right for us." Cole released Martha but kept her hand in his. "You think so, I know so. Mama always said the best kind of love was the kind that made you better, that helped you grow. You've both been better since you found each other. Happier, more yourselves. That's what real love does." "When did you get so wise?" Cole asked his daughter, his voice thick with emotion. "I learned from the best," Emma said simply. "From Mama and from Martha. Between the two of them, I've learned that love isn't about being perfect or beautiful or having everything figured out. It's about showing up every day and doing the work and caring enough to try. That's what you both do. That's why this will work." Martha pulled Emma into their embrace, the three of them standing together in the spring sunshine. "Come on, let's go tell the others. They're probably bursting with curiosity and plans." Inside, they found Michael, Sarah and Grace already making lists of what needed to be done for a wedding. The children's excitement was infectious, and soon they were all talking over each other, planning and dreaming and celebrating. Martha sat at the table surrounded by noise and joy and family, both the family she'd brought with her and the family she was joining, and felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged. These were her people. This was home. Cole caught her eye across the chaos and mouthed, "I love you." Martha mouthed back, "I love you too." And just like that, everything that had seemed broken and ruined and beyond repair began to feel like it might be whole again. Not the same as before, never that, but whole in a new way, scarred but strong, different but beautiful, built from broken pieces but solid and true. Katherine Pierce had meant to destroy what the V were building, but instead she'd forced them to claim it publicly, to admit what they felt, to move forward into a future they might have been too cautious to reach for on their own. In trying to tear them apart, she'd pushed them together. And as Martha watched Cole smile at something Emma said, as she felt Sarah lean against her side and Grace climb into her lap, as she heard Michael's laugh blend with the others, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For second chances, for unexpected blessings, for the kind of love that saw past surfaces to the truth beneath, for this man who'd looked at her scarred face and seen beauty, who'd looked at her desperate circumstances and seen capability, who'd looked at her broken heart and seen someone worth loving. She'd come to Montana expecting only survival. She'd found something infinitely more precious. She'd found home, she'd found family, she'd found love, and she'd found herself again. The woman she'd been before loss and scarring had tried to convince her she was less than whole. That woman had been there all along, waiting to be seen and valued and chosen. Cole Davidson had done all three, and Martha Hensley, soon to be Martha Davidson, had finally learned to see herself through his eyes, not as damaged goods or a desperate widow or a scarred monster, but as a woman of strength and capability and worth. A woman deserving of love and happiness and a future bright with possibility. The spring sunshine poured through the windows, warming the house, and outside the world was coming back to life after winter's long sleep. Inside, a family was being born from loss and courage and the willingness to try again. And Martha, sitting at the heart of it all, knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. That was all she needed. That was everything. The week between the proposal and the wedding passed in a blur of activity and emotion that left Martha feeling both exhilarated and terrified. They'd decided on a simple ceremony at the ranch, just family and a few close neighbours, nothing elaborate or expensive. Cole had ridden to town to file the necessary papers and invite the minister, while Martha and the girls had thrown themselves into preparing for the day with an enthusiasm that was both touching and overwhelming. Sarah had appointed herself in charge of Martha's dress, insisting that her mother needed something new and special, not just another work dress pressed into service. Together they'd chosen a bolt of blue fabric from the limited selection at the general store, a soft cotton in a shade that reminded Martha of summer skies, and Sarah had worked alongside her mother every evening, their heads bent together over seams and hems, stitching a future into being one careful stitch at a time. Emma had taken charge of the house, cleaning everything until it gleamed, and arranging wildflowers in every available container, transforming the simple ranch house into something that felt almost festive. Grace had made decorations with scraps of paper and ribbon, her childish enthusiasm creating garlands that were more enthusiasm than artistry, but which everyone agreed were perfect. Michael had worked with Cole to prepare the ranch for guests, making sure there was seating and that the yard was presentable, taking his responsibilities as the oldest child seriously and with visible pride. The children's excitement had been a balm to Martha's nerves, their joy reminding her that this wasn't just about her fears and doubts, but about creating something good for all of them, about building a family that could weather whatever storms came. Still, in the quiet moments when she was alone with her thoughts, terror would creep in. What if Cole woke up one morning and regretted choosing someone so damaged? What if the reality of being married to a scarred woman proved harder than he'd anticipated? What if people's gossip and cruelty eventually wore down his conviction that she was worth loving? What if she failed him somehow, couldn't be the wife he needed, couldn't fill the hole Rebecca had left? The doubts circled like vultures, picking at her fragile confidence, whispering that she was foolish to believe she deserved this happiness. But then Cole would catch her eye across the dinner table and smile, or Emma would squeeze her hand while they worked together in the kitchen, or one of her children would say something about their new family with such unguarded joy, and the doubts would recede, not disappear entirely, because 2 years of being treated as less than human had carved those insecurities deep, but fade enough that she could breathe past them, could believe that maybe this time things would actually work out. The night before the wedding, Martha lay awake in the small room that had been hers since she'd arrived, but which she'd leave tomorrow to share Cole's larger room, his bed, his life. Sarah slept peacefully beside her, Grace curled like a kitten at the foot of the bed, and Martha listened to their breathing and tried to calm her racing heart. Tomorrow she'd become a wife again, would promise before God and witnesses to love and honour a man she'd known for less than a year, but who felt in some ways like he'd always been part of her story. Tomorrow everything would change, would become official and permanent in ways that both thrilled and frightened her. A soft knock at her door startled her, and she rose carefully to avoid waking the girls. Cole stood outside, looking as unable to sleep as she felt, his hair mussed and his expression uncertain in the lamplight he carried. "I know it's not proper for me to be here the night before the wedding," he said quietly, "but I couldn't sleep and I saw your lamp still burning and I thought maybe you couldn't either." "You thought right," Martha admitted, stepping into the hallway and closing the door softly behind her. "My mind won't settle. Mine either. Walk with me?" They went outside into the blessed spring night, the air cool but not cold, carrying the scent of growing things and the distant smell of the mountains. The sky was brilliant with stars, the moon nearly full, and they walked without speaking at first, just moving through the silver landscape together until they reached the garden where Martha had spent so many hours working. "Are you having second thoughts?" Cole asked finally, his voice careful. "Because if you are, it's not too late. I won't hold you to this if you're not certain." "No," Martha said immediately. "No second thoughts about you or about us, just fears about whether I can be what you need, whether I'm enough." "Enough?" Cole turned to face her, his expression almost fierce in the moonlight. "Martha, you're more than enough. You're everything I didn't know I needed, and more than I dared hope to find again. But your first wife, Rebecca, she was beautiful and accomplished, and everything a woman should be. How can I possibly measure up to that? How can I be what you need when I can't even look in a mirror without seeing a monster?" Cole's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs gentle on her scarred cheeks. "Listen to me very carefully. Rebecca was wonderful, and I loved her with everything I had. But she's gone, and you're not her replacement or some second choice. Consolation prize. You're Martha, your own person with your own strengths and your own beauty, and the things I love about you aren't diminished by your scars or by comparison to Rebecca. They're uniquely yours." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "When Rebecca died, I thought love had died with her. I thought I was done, that the best parts of my life were behind me. But then you came here, this fierce, determined woman with 3 children and almost nothing else, and you transformed my household and my daughter and eventually me. You did it without asking for anything, without expecting anything, just by being yourself and working hard and showing us all what real strength looks like. That's not less than what Rebecca was. It's different, and it's exactly what we needed." "I'm scared," Martha whispered. "Scared that I'll disappoint you. Scared that the reality of being married to me will be harder than you think. Scared that people's cruelty will eventually poison what we have." "I'm scared too," Cole admitted. "Scared I'll fail you somehow, that I won't be able to protect you from gossip and meanness. Scared that I'm asking too much of you, expecting you to take on a grieving daughter and a failing ranch and a man who doesn't always know how to express what he feels. But being scared doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It just means what we're doing matters enough to be frightening." "When did you get so wise?" Martha asked, echoing Emma's words from days earlier. "I learned from you. You've shown me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it. Every day you get up and work and care for people, even though the world has been cruel to you. That's taught me more about strength than anything else ever has." They stood together in the moonlit garden, holding each other, drawing strength from shared vulnerability. Tomorrow they'd make their promises public and binding, but tonight they were just 2 scared people who'd decided to be brave together, to risk their hearts one more time despite all the ways they'd been broken before. "Thank you," Martha said finally, "for seeing me, for choosing me, for making me believe I could be loved. Loved again." "Thank you for the same," Cole replied, "for bringing life back to this house, for giving me a reason to hope again, for being willing to take a chance on a grieving widower and his wild daughter." "Emma's not wild anymore," Martha said with a small laugh. "She's wonderful. Because of you, you gave her back her childhood while also teaching her how to become a good woman. That's a gift I can never repay. You don't have to repay it. That's what love does. It gives freely." They returned to the house hand in hand, and at Martha's door, Cole kissed her softly. A promise of more to come, but restrained by the propriety they'd tried so hard to maintain. "Tomorrow," he said, "Tomorrow you'll be my wife." "Tomorrow," Martha agreed, "and I can't wait." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring morning that felt like a benediction. Martha woke early, nerves making sleep impossible, and found Sarah already awake beside her, eyes bright with excitement. "It's your wedding day, Mama," Sarah whispered, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the magic. "Are you happy?" "I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once," Martha admitted. "But yes, sweetheart, I'm happy." "Good. You deserve to be happy. Papa would want that for you." The mention of Thomas brought tears to Martha's eyes, but they were gentle tears, not the wrenching grief of early loss. "I think you would approve of Cole. They're similar men in some ways, good and steady and kind." They spent the morning getting ready, Sarah helping Martha into the blue dress they'd sewn together, arranging her hair in a simple style that didn't try to hide her scars but also didn't emphasize them. Emma appeared with wild flowers to weave into Martha's hair, her face glowing with excitement, and Grace danced around them all chattering about how pretty Mama looked and how this was the best day ever. Looking at herself in the small mirror, Martha saw what she always saw. The scars that ran from temple to jaw, the puckered skin that would never be smooth again, the face that would never be conventionally beautiful. But for the first time, she also saw past them to the woman beneath. The strength in her eyes, the determination in her jaw, the love in her expression as she looked at her daughters. Maybe Cole was right. Maybe beauty wasn't just about unmarked skin and perfect features. Maybe it was about survival and courage and the capacity to love despite everything. By noon, neighbours began to arrive, families from surrounding ranches coming to witness the union and celebrate with them. Martha was touched by how many came, how warmly they greeted her, how several of the ranch wives went out of their way to tell her how glad they were that Cole had found happiness again. Not everyone approved. She could see it in some faces, the disapproval of those who thought Cole was settling or that Martha had trapped him. But more people seemed genuinely pleased, and several told her they admired her courage and were glad she'd come to the valley. Notably absent was Katherine Pierce, which was both a relief and a small victory. The woman who'd tried so hard to destroy what they were building wouldn't get to witness its culmination, wouldn't get to poison their day with her bitterness and spite. The ceremony was held in the main room of the ranch house, the space transformed by Emma's decorations and the presence of so many people. The minister from town, an elderly man named Reverend Fletcher, who had known Cole for years, stood before the fireplace with Cole beside him. Martha entered on Michael's arm, her son walking her down the makeshift aisle with such pride and dignity that her heart swelled. Sarah and Grace followed as attendants, and Emma stood beside her father as his supporter, the three girls unified in their joy. Cole wore his best suit, his hair freshly trimmed, his face serious but his eyes warm as they met Martha's. She moved to stand beside him, her hand trembling slightly as he took it, and Reverend Fletcher began the familiar words of the marriage ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Cole Davidson and Martha Hensley in holy matrimony. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently and with full understanding of the commitment being made. These two people have chosen to bind their lives together, to face whatever comes as partners, to build a family and a future together." The Reverend continued with the traditional words, asking if anyone objected, confirming that both Cole and Martha entered into this marriage freely and willingly. Then came the vows, and Martha repeated the ancient promises with a steady voice, pledging to love and honour Cole in sickness and health, for better or worse, until death parted them. Cole made the same promises, his voice firm and clear, his eyes never leaving hers. But then, before the Reverend could pronounce them married, Cole did something unexpected. He took both of Martha's hands in his and spoke directly to her, his voice carrying through the silent room. "Martha Hensley, you warned me you could only offer meals, not beauty, but you were wrong." Martha's breath caught, old wounds suddenly reopening. This was it, she thought with a flash of panic. This was where he'd admit he'd made a mistake, where he'd acknowledged that she wasn't beautiful and never could be, where everyone would see that he was settling for damaged goods. But Cole continued, his voice gentle but firm. "You've given me far more than beauty. You've given me partnership, someone to share the burdens and joys of running this ranch and raising our children. You've given me faith, showing me through your own courage and resilience that life, after devastating loss, is not just possible but can be rich and meaningful. You've given me laughter in my home again. warmth and joy where there'd been only grief and silence. You've given me a reason to build rather than just survive, to look toward the future with hope instead of just enduring the present. Tears were streaming down Martha's scarred face now, but Cole wasn't finished. You've shown my daughter that strength matters more than appearance, that character is what defines a person's worth. You've shown my household that love isn't about what we see on the surface, but about what we give to each other. The care we provide, the support we offer, the way we show up day after day doing the hard work of being family. Cole's thumbs brushed away her tears, his touch infinitely gentle on her scarred skin. I thought I'd lost everything beautiful about myself, Martha sobbed, the words breaking free from the place she'd kept them locked away. When the smallpox took my face, when Thomas and James died, when people started looking at me with pity and revulsion instead of kindness, I thought all the beauty in my life was gone forever. I thought I'd never be seen as anything but ugly, never be chosen, never be loved for who I am beneath these scars. You are beautiful, Cole said firmly, his voice ringing with conviction. Not despite your scars, but including them. They are proof you survived something terrible. They are proof you fought and won, that you kept going when giving up would have been easier. They are proof that when faced with unimaginable loss and pain, you chose your children over despair, chose work over surrender, chose hope over bitterness. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. The room was utterly silent, everyone frozen by the raw emotion of the moment. Martha could see tears on more than one face, could feel the collective held breath of witnesses who understood they were seeing something profound and real. When I look at you, Cole continued, his voice softer now but no less intense, I don't see scars. I mean, I see them of course, but they're not what I see. I see a woman who works from dawn to dusk without complaint. I see a mother who'd sacrifice anything for her children. I see someone who's survived multiple tragedies and come through them, not bitter, but somehow still kind, still patient, still capable of love. I see the most courageous person I've ever known, and I'm honoured beyond words that you're willing to share your life with me. I love you, Martha said through her tears. I love you so much it scares me. I love you too. And I promise you every day for the rest of our lives, I'll work to make sure you know it. I'll work to make sure you see yourself the way I see you, the way your children see you, the way everyone who actually knows you sees you. Not as damaged or ugly or less than, but as strong and capable and beautiful in all the ways that matter. Cole turned to the Reverend, still holding Martha's hands. I'm sorry for interrupting the ceremony. Please continue. Reverend Fletcher cleared his throat roughly, clearly moved. I think you've already said the most important vows, but for the sake of tradition and the law, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Cole, you may kiss your bride. Cole pulled Martha close and kissed her, and the room erupted in cheers and applause. The children were loudest of all, Emma's voice cutting through shouting congratulations, while Sarah and Grace jumped up and down, clapping. Michael whistled, and the assembled neighbours added their voices to the celebration. When they finally broke apart, both of them laughing and crying at once, Emma threw herself at them both, wrapping her arms around them in a fierce hug. Thank you, she said, her voice muffled against their joined embrace. Thank you for choosing each other. Thank you for making us a real family. Then so quietly that only Martha and Cole heard, Emma said, Mama, I'm going to call you Mama now, if that's all right. You've earned it, Martha's, sobered at hearing that word, at being claimed by this girl who'd once hated her, was loud and unrestrained. She gathered Emma close, Cole's arm around them both, and felt something settle into place inside her chest. This was her daughter now, not by birth, but by choice and love and shared experience. This was her family, all of them, bound together not by blood, but by something equally strong. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Neighbours had brought food despite Martha's protest that she'd handle it all, and the table groaned under the weight of dishes both familiar and new. People ate and talked and laughed, sharing stories about Cole and Rebecca, about the early days of the ranch, about their own struggles and triumphs. Several people went out of their way to tell Martha how glad they were she'd joined the community, how they admired her strength, how they hoped she'd be happy here. Old Mrs. Anderson, who owned the ranch to the east, pulled Martha aside at one point. You're good for him, she said without preamble. I was worried after Rebecca died. Watched Cole close himself off, saw Emma turn wild, thought they might both be lost to grief. But you brought them back. You gave them a future again. That takes a special kind of woman. "Thank you," Martha said, touched by the older woman's bluntness. "That means a great deal coming from you. And don't you listen to the gossips and the jealous ones like Katherine Pierce. You're worth 10 of her, scars and all. Real beauty defades, character endures, you've got character to spare." As the afternoon wore into evening and neighbours began to depart, making their way home before dark, Martha found herself standing on the porch watching them go. Cole came to stand beside her, his arm slipping around her waist in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I ever thought I'd be again," Martha replied honestly. "Terrified still, but happy. Good terrified or bad terrified? Good terrified. The kind that comes from having something precious you're afraid of losing. You're not going to lose this. Lose us, I promise you that." "You can't promise that," Martha said gently. "Life doesn't work that way. Fever and accidents and all manner of disasters can take away what we love. You know that as well as I do." "You're right," Cole acknowledged. "I can't promise we'll all live to old age without further tragedy. But I can promise that whatever comes, we'll face it together. That I won't give up on us, on this family we're building, that I'll fight for what we have with everything I've got. That's all anyone can promise," Martha said, "and it's enough." Inside, the children were cleaning up from the celebration, working together with the easy cooperation of people who'd become a unit. Emma directed the younger ones with gentle authority. Michael hauled heavy items without being asked. Sarah and Grace worked in tandem on the dishes. They were a family already, Martha realised. They'd been becoming one all along through shared meals and shared work and the slow building of trust and affection. "Mrs. Davidson," Cole said, testing out the name. "How does it sound?" "Strange but wonderful," Martha admitted. "I never thought I'd be anyone's wife again." "Well, you are now. Mine. For better or worse, in sickness and health, until death do us part. That's a long time, potentially. Sure you can stand being married to me for that long?" Cole pulled her close, his hand coming up to cup her scarred cheek. "I'm counting on it being a very long time. We've both lost too much too young. I'm hoping we get decades together, growing old and ornery and watching these children grow up and give us grandchildren to spoil." "Grandchildren," Martha repeated wonderingly. "I hadn't thought that far ahead." "Start thinking. Because this is just the beginning, Martha. We've got a whole future to build together." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, the Davidson family gathered on the porch. Cole and Martha stood together, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. Emma leaned against Cole's other side, while Michael stood tall beside Martha. Sarah and Grace sat on the porch steps, Grace's head in her sister's lap. They looked like what they were, a family pieced together from broken parts but somehow whole, scarred but healing, different from what any of them had planned, but exactly what they all needed. "This is home," Emma said quietly, putting into words what they all felt. "This is where we belong. This is home," Martha agreed. "And you're right. We all belong here, together." Cole looked at the woman beside him, this fierce survivor who'd transformed his household and his heart, and felt gratitude so profound it was almost overwhelming. She'd come to him broken and desperate, offering only her labour, expecting only survival. But she'd given him so much more. She'd given him a partner, a friend, a love he thought he'd never find again. She'd given his daughter a mother who understood grief and loss and the east and the slow path back to joy. She'd given his house warmth and his future hope, and all he'd had to do was see her, really see her, past the scars that others fixated on, past the damage that made them dismiss her, to the incredible woman beneath. It hadn't been hard. In fact, it had been the easiest thing he'd ever done, falling in love with Martha Hensley. Staying in love with Martha Davidson would be even easier. The stars were beginning to emerge overhead, tiny points of light in the deepening blue, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, the sound lonely and wild and somehow fitting. This was the frontier, harsh and beautiful and unforgiving. But it was also home, a place where people could start over, where the past didn't have to define the future, where scars could be proof of survival rather than marks of ruin. Martha thought about the journey that had brought her here, the losses that had nearly destroyed her, the scarring that had stolen her face and seemingly her future, the desperate journey west with 3 children and almost nothing else. The terror of knocking on a stranger's door and offering only meals, not beauty, because beauty was all she thought men valued, and beauty was the one thing she could never offer again. But Cole had taught her differently. He'd shown her that real value lay in character, in capability, in the strength to keep going when everything seemed lost. He'd seen past her scars to the woman beneath and had chosen her, not despite her damage but including it, recognizing that her scars were part of her story, part of what made her who she was. "I love you," she said again, the words still new enough to feel miraculous. "I love all of you, this family, this home, this life we're building together." "We love you too," Emma said, and the other children echoed her, a chorus of voices in the gathering dark. Cole kissed the top of Martha's head, content to stand there holding her as night fell completely and the stars blazed overhead in their millions. They'd both survived terrible things, they'd both loved and lost, they'd both been broken by life and had to figure out how to keep living anyway, but they'd survived, they'd endured, and now, together, they were building something new from the pieces that remained. Not replacing what they'd lost, never that, but creating something different and equally precious. A family born from choice rather than blood, from shared struggle rather than easy circumstance, from the courage to risk loving again despite all the ways they'd been hurt before. That was beauty, Cole thought. Real beauty, not unmarked skin or perfect features, but the resilience of the human heart, the capacity to hope even after hope seemed lost, the courage to open yourself to love even when love had failed you before. Martha was beautiful, had been all along. It had just taken him a while to learn how to see it, to recognize that true beauty wore many faces, and that some of the most beautiful people carried their courage in the scars they'd survived. The night deepened around them, but on the porch of the Davidson ranch there was warmth and light and love, a widow and a widower, 4 children from 2 families, all of them scarred in different ways, all of them survivors, all of them choosing each other day after day, building a future together, one meal, one conversation, one act of kindness at a time. It wasn't the life any of them had planned. It was better. Because it was real and hard-won and built on honest foundations. Because it was chosen rather than assumed. Because it proved that endings weren't really endings, just transitions to new beginnings. And as Martha stood surrounded by her family, this unlikely collection of people who'd become hers through circumstance and love and sheer determination, she finally understood what Cole had been trying to tell her. She was beautiful, not despite her scars, but including them. Beautiful in her strength, her survival, her capacity to love despite everything. Beautiful in the way she'd fought for her children, worked for her household, opened her heart even when it seemed safer to keep it closed. The smallpox had taken her face but not her beauty. Loss had taken her husband but not her capacity to love. Hardship had marked her, but not broken her. She was Martha Davidson now. Wife, mother, partner, survivor. Scarred but whole, damaged but beautiful, broken and rebuilt into something even stronger. And standing on her porch under the Montana stars, surrounded by love and belonging and home, Martha finally believed it. Finally saw herself the way Cole saw her, the way her children saw her, the way she deserved to be seen, as beautiful, as valuable, as worthy of love, as enough, more than enough, as everything.